The revolving door jams at 10:17 in the evening, November 28th, 1942, Thanksgiving night in Boston. The sound is wrong. Not the smooth rotation of ball bearings in their tracks, but a grinding halt, metal against metal, then silence. Inside the Coconut Grove nightclub, over 1,000 people celebrate packed into a space designed for 460. The air is thick. Cigarette smoke mingles with perfume and sweat and the smell of grease from the kitchen where turkeys roast for late-night service. The temperature hovers near 85 degrees. Bodies pressed together. Music from the band drowns conversation. This is celebration. This is Thanksgiving. This is America in 1942, grateful for an evening away from war news and rationing, and the fear that sits in every home with sons overseas. Outside, the door has stopped. Bodies press against glass from inside, 6 deep at first. The pressure builds like water behind a dam. Those at the front cannot breathe. Ribs compress. Lungs strain against the weight of other bodies. Those behind cannot see, cannot know, cannot stop. The pressure of crowd propels them forward, regardless of will or intention. Bodies stack 8 deep, then 10. The glass begins to spiderweb under pressure. It was never designed to withstand. 2 minutes earlier, at 10:15, in the basement Melody Lounge, where the air is cooler and couples dance in artificial twilight, created by low-wattage bulbs and fabric draped to simulate tropical paradise, a 16-year-old busboy named Stanley Tomaszewski strikes a match. The sound is insignificant. The scrape of sulfur against a rough paper. A tiny flame blooms in darkness. Stanley reaches up to replace a light bulb someone unscrewed for romantic ambience. The match touches an artificial palm frond coated in flammable adhesive. What happens next unfolds with the speed of nightmare made real. Fire races across the fabric ceiling at a rate later investigators will calculate at approximately 20 feet per second. Not the slow spread of normal fire consuming fuel gradually, but explosive propagation through material designed to be decorative, not safe. The adhesive coating ignites. The nitrocellulose fabric beneath catches. Burning material drips onto the crowd below like napalm. People scream. The sound fills the basement, high-pitched and terrible and spreading like contagion through the crowded space. The basement fills with smoke in under 2 minutes. Not the grey smoke of wood fire or the white smoke of paper burning. Black smoke, toxic, dense, laden with chemicals from burning nitrocellulose and adhesive and the 1,000 synthetic materials that comprise the Grove's tropical fantasy. Carbon monoxide in concentrations high enough to kill in seconds. Hydrogen cyanide released by burning fabric. Phosgene gas from combusting plastics. The air becomes poison. Most Melody Lounge patrons die in the basement. Never reach the stairs. Simply stop breathing. The smoke steals consciousness before pain registers. They collapse where they stand or sit or dance. One moment alive, the next not. The transition is that fast, that absolute, that final. Those who reach the stairs find a narrow passage jammed with bodies, people falling, being trampled, creating blockages that trap those behind. The stairway is perhaps 4 feet wide, designed for leisurely ascent and descent, not for desperate flight, not for 200 people trying to evacuate simultaneously while smoke fills lungs and fire spreads overhead. Upstairs in the main dining room, patrons initially do not realize catastrophe is unfolding beneath them. The band continues playing. Waiters continue serving. Conversations continue at tables where families celebrate Thanksgiving dinner extended into evening entertainment. Then burning fabric begins falling from the ceiling. Embers drifting down like hellish snow. Screams come from the Melody Lounge stairway as the few who escape the basement burst into the main room bringing tales of fire below and smoke and death. The realization hits simultaneously across the crowded space. Fire. The word passes like contagion. From table to table, mouth to ear, fire, fire, fire. Panic erupts. 1,000 people rush for exits they believe exist, but which have been locked or blocked or concealed by decorations. The main revolving door jams immediately under pressure. It was never designed to withstand. The Broadway exit is locked with a panic bar that requires pulling inward, counterintuitive, fatal. In emergencies, terrified people push outward with all their strength. They do not think to pull. They push, and the door does not open, and they die pushing. The Piedmont Street exit is blocked by decorative folding doors that cannot be opened when pressed from inside by crowd pressure. The pressure folds the doors inward, creating a barrier, creating a tomb. The Shawmut Street exit has been concealed behind drapes for aesthetic reasons, unknown to most patrons. Invisible in the smoke that now fills the dining room with the same speed it filled the basement. Windows have been boarded over to comply with wartime blackout regulations, preventing light from escaping at night lest it aid enemy bombers navigating toward American cities. These boarded windows prevent escape. They also prevent outside observers from seeing the fire immediately. The alarm is delayed. The response is delayed. And in those minutes of delay, hundreds die. 5 minutes after Stanley Tomaszewski strikes that match, the main dining room is fully engulfed. Not by fire particularly. The structural damage will be surprisingly minimal, but by smoke, thick, toxic, absolute. Smoke that kills not by suffocation but by poisoning. That steals consciousness in seconds. That drops victims mid-stride like strings cut on puppets. Most victims die not from burns, but from smoke inhalation. Their lungs fill with poison. Their blood absorbs carbon monoxide that binds to hemoglobin with greater affinity than oxygen. The brain, starved of oxygen, shuts down. They simply stop. Stop breathing. Stop moving. Stop being. They die standing upright, held in place by the crowd pressed around them, dead but not yet fallen, because there is nowhere to fall in that compressed mass of humanity. Boston Fire Department receives first alarm at 10:17. Just 2 minutes after ignition, fire trucks arrive within 3 minutes of that alarm. But by the time firefighters reach the scene, most deaths have already occurred. The speed of the fire, the toxicity of the smoke, the inadequate exits, the overcrowding, all combined to create conditions where survival required being near an exit when fire started, or being lucky enough to follow someone who knew hidden employee exits that patrons did not. Everyone else died or came very close to death in those 5 minutes between match strike and rescue. Firefighters break through boarded windows, axes splitting wood, glass shattering inward, cold November air rushing into superheated space. They find rooms packed with bodies. Some victims are still alive, but unconscious from smoke inhalation. Skin pale, lips blue, breathing shallow or absent. Their survival depends on being dragged outside within the next few minutes, on lungs clearing, on hearts continuing to beat, on the slim margin between clinical death and biological death not yet being crossed. Firefighters and police pull victims through broken windows, drag them through doors forced open with crowbars and axes and raw strength, line them on sidewalk in rows. The scene outside is surreal. Bodies everywhere in various states of death and near death. Some burned, most not. Many looking as though they are simply sleeping. Faces peaceful. No visible injuries. Except they will never wake. The poison in their blood is irreversible. The damage to their brains is complete. Massachusetts General Hospital, 2 blocks away, is overwhelmed within minutes. Ambulances arrive continuously, carrying the injured, carrying the dying, carrying the dead misidentified as possibly savable because they look unharmed. Hospital emergency room becomes triage center, then morgue. Doctors and nurses work frantically. But there is no treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning beyond oxygen and time, and many victims are beyond help. The poison has done its work. Other hospitals across Boston receive victims. Temporary morgues are set up in various locations: garages, warehouses, the Boston Garden Sports Arena. Anywhere with space to lay bodies in rows while families begin the grim pilgrimage of identification. The scale of death is beyond anything Boston has experienced in peacetime, beyond anything America has experienced outside of war. The final death toll is 492. It would have been substantially higher, except approximately 300 people managed escape through side exits, through windows broken from inside by patrons using chairs as battering rams, by following waiters and staff who knew hidden employee exits, by luck, by proximity to doors when fire started, by chance more than choice. 492. Each death is documented. Each victim has a name, an age, a family. The youngest is 16. The oldest is 68. Between those ages, 490 others, united only by having made the decision to celebrate Thanksgiving at the Coconut Grove, to extend their holiday into evening entertainment, to seek joy and find death instead. This is Thanksgiving's shadow history. The pattern of disasters that cluster around America's holiday of gratitude with grim regularity across generations. Ships that sank in November, storms carrying families home for celebration, trains that derailed under pressure to maintain holiday schedules, fires that consumed those preparing feasts, crowds that stampeded for bargains, dinners that became poison, highways that claim hundreds of lives annually during Thanksgiving week, the deaths number in the thousands across the decades, all documented in archives, all verified in death certificates, all preserved in coroner reports and investigation records, and the memories of families who can no longer celebrate without remembering what they lost. The documentation exists because bureaucracies document death with the same efficiency they document everything else. The paperwork of tragedy, the filing of grief, the archiving of catastrophe. Tonight we descend into Thanksgiving's darkness. Not the sanitized narrative of pilgrims and abundance, but the documented record of preventable disasters that killed thousands. We examine not to discourage celebration, but to understand that holidays are not immune to tragedy, that celebration and catastrophe can occupy the same day, that gratitude and grief are not opposites, but companions in the American experience of Thanksgiving. Every disaster mentioned tonight is verified through historical records. Every death toll is documented in official reports. Every source is cited. This is not speculation or sensationalism. This is preserved fact, parish death records, ship manifests, train accident reports, fire marshal investigations, FBI crime statistics, National Transportation Safety Board findings. The paper trail of disaster stretches back generations. The dead speak through documents if we are willing to listen. The pattern begins before Thanksgiving was a national holiday, before Abraham Lincoln declared it such in 1863, attempting to unite a nation fractured by civil war. Already, various states held Thanksgiving celebrations on different dates. Already disasters marked those days. Ships sank. Fires destroyed homes where elaborate meals were being prepared. Violence erupted at gatherings where family tensions and alcohol mixed badly. The holiday carried danger from its inception. When Lincoln made Thanksgiving national, the disaster pattern intensified simply because more people were celebrating simultaneously. More travelers meant more shipwrecks, more train derailments, more accidents on roads and rails and water. More large meals meant more kitchen fires, more food poisonings, more opportunities for contamination. More family gatherings meant more violence, more murders committed in kitchens with knives readily available, more suicides by people for whom forced proximity was unbearable rather than joyful. By the early 20th century, Thanksgiving had developed specific disaster signatures that repeat with statistical regularity. Maritime catastrophes gave way to railroad crashes as steam replaced sail. House fires evolved into nightclub conflagrations as Americans moved celebrations from private homes to public spaces. Accidental food poisonings became mass outbreaks linked to industrial food service. And threading through all of it, constant as gravity, the domestic violence, the family murders, the people who died not from accident, but from deliberate acts by those who should have loved them. Thanksgiving is statistically one of the most dangerous days on the American calendar. This is not opinion or exaggeration. This is documented in data compiled by federal agencies. More people travel on Thanksgiving than any other holiday except Christmas. More house fires occur. More domestic violence incidents are reported. Emergency rooms see spikes in knife injuries from amateur cooks, alcohol poisonings from excessive celebration, assault cases from family conflicts that escalate into violence. The Centers for Disease Control tracks this. The FBI compiles crime statistics that show clear Thanksgiving patterns. Insurance companies adjust premiums accordingly because actuarial tables do not lie. The holiday we associate with safety and tradition and family values is actually marked by elevated danger across multiple categories. We simply choose not to acknowledge this. We prefer the sanitized narrative, the Norman Rockwell painting, the myth of universal celebration untouched by tragedy. But the large-scale disasters, the events that kill dozens or hundreds in single incidents, those cannot be ignored, cannot be dismissed as statistical anomalies, cannot be explained away as isolated tragedies. The pattern is too consistent, the documentation too extensive, the death toll too high. We examine these tonight not to assign blame, though blame often exists, not to sensationalize tragedy, though tragedy is inherently dramatic, but to understand patterns, to recognize that holidays create specific conditions where normal risks intensify, to acknowledge that celebration requires vigilance, that gratitude for what we have should include protecting it, that the dead deserve remembering even as we celebrate with the living. Before we descend into documented disaster, I must note that this exploration discusses deaths that occurred during what should have been joyful celebrations. Treatment throughout is respectful and factual, not sensationalized, not exploitative. We present documented evidence, not speculation, not rumor, not urban legend. The dead deserve dignity. Their families deserve truth. And we, the living, deserve to understand that holidays carry danger we prefer not to acknowledge, but which exists regardless of our acknowledgement. I am Mr. Ravenhurst. And tonight we discover that Thanksgiving's history contains not only the sanitized narrative we learned as children, but also a documented record of disasters that killed thousands, of celebrations that ended in death within minutes or hours of beginning, of gratitude transformed to grief faster than hearts could process the transition from joy to horror. The deaths are certain, documented, preserved in archives that anyone can access if they are willing to look. What we learn from them, whether we learn anything at all, that remains uncertain. That depends on choices we make, on whether we acknowledge that holidays are not magically safe, on whether we take precautions or simply hope disaster happens to someone else. Our first descent takes us to Lake Erie in 1850, where cold water claims not through malice, but through the convergence of commercial pressure, technological limitation, and November weather, where a steamship called the Griffith carried families desperate to reach home for Thanksgiving, where 256 people learned that nature does not care about holidays. That cold water drowns the grateful as efficiently as the ungrateful. That celebration is no shield against catastrophe when humans make wrong choices in dangerous conditions. Chapter 1. Lake Erie's Cold Mathematics, November 25th, 1850. Dawn breaks over Buffalo Harbor. grey light on grey water. The temperature is 38 degrees. Wind from the northwest at 15 miles per hour. Lake Erie stretches east toward Toledo. 100 miles of water that seems calm from shore, but which mariners know can turn savage with terrifying speed. The steamship Griffith departs at 7 in the morning. 286 souls aboard, passengers and crew, men, women, children, families travelling to reach relatives for Thanksgiving celebrations planned 3 days hence. The holiday is not yet national, will not be for another 13 years. But already Americans travel great distances to gather. Already the pressure to arrive on time overrides caution. Already commercial interests prioritize schedule over safety. The Griffith is a sidewheel steamship, 202 feet long, wooden hull, side-mounted paddle wheel powered by steam boilers kept constantly hot, constantly pressurized, constantly on the edge of explosive force, contained by riveted iron and engineering calculations that leave minimal margin for error. The ship was built in 1848, 2 years old, considered modern and safe by the standards of its time, which is to say, not safe at all by any objective measure. But captains sail anyway, because passengers demand passage, because shipping companies demand revenue, because in 1850, crossing Lake Erie is what connecting Buffalo to Toledo requires. There are no alternatives, no highways, no airplanes, only ships. And ships sail regardless of weather, because schedules must be maintained, and profits must be made, and passengers have places they must be. The weather is clear at departure. This is what dooms them. Had the storm been visible at dawn, even commercial pressure might not have overcome common sense. But the sky is cloudy but not threatening. The wind is steady but not dangerous. The lake surface shows whitecaps, but nothing suggesting the savage conditions developing 60 miles east, where cold air masses collide over deep water and meteorological violence gestates unseen. Lake Erie in late November is a killer. This is documented in maritime records preserved in historical society, archives around the Great Lakes. Captains who survived November crossings recorded observations in ship logs. Insurance companies documented losses in actuarial tables. Newspapers documented disasters in articles that repeat the same pattern year after year. November storms on Lake Erie develop with savage speed. Clear conditions give way to gales within hours. Temperatures drop below freezing. Ice forms on superstructures, adding dangerous weight high above the waterline, destabilizing ships, making them top-heavy and prone to capsize. Waves, while smaller than ocean waves, come in rapid succession. No long troughs between crests where ships can recover. Just constant battering, relentless assault. Hull timbers stressed beyond design limits. Mechanical systems overwhelmed. Human endurance exhausted. Lake Erie storms are brief but brutal. They kill efficiently, and they occur with greatest frequency in November, when commercial traffic is highest, because passengers and cargo must move before winter ice closes the lakes entirely. Experienced captains who know the lakes avoid November travel, but experience does not guarantee employment. Companies hire young captains willing to sail in conditions veterans refuse, or they pressure experienced captains with threats of job loss if schedules are not maintained. The Griffith's captain knows the dangers. Ship logs, later recovered, document his experience. 15 years sailing the lakes. Multiple November crossings survived. He knows what Lake Erie can do. He departs anyway. Clear weather gives way to storm by early afternoon. The transition is rapid, documented by observers on shore who watch the weather change. By 2 in the afternoon, winds exceed 40 miles per hour. By 3, 50. By 4, gusts reach 60 with sustained winds at 45. The lake surface transforms from choppy to violent. Waves reach 15 to 20 feet. Enormous for a lake where fetch is limited and waves cannot build to ocean scale. but large enough. More than large enough. The Griffith's side-mounted paddle wheel, exposed and vulnerable, shatters under wave impact. The mechanism that propelled the ship, that gave steerage, that allowed controlled navigation, is simply destroyed. Wooden paddles splinter. The iron framework bends. The connecting shaft twists beyond function. In the span of minutes, the Griffith loses propulsion and maneuverability. The ship turns broadside to the waves, the most dangerous position possible. Hull presented to wave assault rather than bow cutting through. Water pours over the side with each wave, into the engine room through hatches that cannot be secured against the volume. The boilers, kept constantly hot to maintain steam pressure, are suddenly flooded with lake water at 38 degrees. The thermal shock is catastrophic. Water flashes to steam instantly. Pressure builds faster than relief valves can vent. The boilers explode. The sound is described by survivors as like artillery fire, a massive boom that reverberates across the water. The blast tears through the wooden hull, kills crew in the engine room instantly. Bodies found later show massive trauma from explosion and scalding steam. The explosion opens the vessel to rapid flooding. Water rushes into spaces below the waterline. The ship's buoyancy fails. She begins to sink. Passengers below deck are thrown from beds and chairs by the explosion. In darkness, because windows are covered by storm shutters and oil lamps have been extinguished as a fire precaution. With the ship listing severely to starboard from flooding, they scramble for stairs to reach the deck, but the explosion has destroyed portions of the stairways. Wooden steps are splintered. Passages are blocked by debris. Some passengers are trapped below as water rises. They drown in darkness in enclosed spaces as the ship sinks beneath them. Others reach the deck only to find lifeboats already launched by crew or damaged by the explosion and storm. The deck is chaos, wind howling, waves washing over the rails, the ship listing progressively as flooding continues. Temperature at 38 degrees, water temperature the same. Survival time in water that cold is measured in minutes. The ship sinks within 15 minutes of the boiler explosion. From functional vessel to wreckage at the bottom of Lake Erie, 40 feet of water, cold and dark. The wreck remains there still, slowly disintegrating, gradually becoming part of the lake bottom. Visited occasionally by divers who document what remains. Wood mostly rotted away. Metal components corroded, but identifiable, verifiable. Physical evidence of disaster preserved by cold water. Those who make it to the deck face an impossible choice. Stay with the sinking vessel and drown as it goes under. Or jump into 38-degree water wearing heavy wool clothing that soaks instantly and drags bodies down. Both options mean probable death. Some choose the ship, clinging to rails as it sinks, going under with the vessel, found later still clutching metal or wood. Their choice to stay was no better and no worse than the choice to jump. Approximately 30 people survive by clinging to wreckage until rescue comes. Pieces of hull, sections of deck, anything that floats. They are pulled from the water hours later by other ships responding to the disaster. Suffering severe hypothermia, frostbite requiring amputations, psychological trauma that will last the remainder of their lives. But alive, 30 out of 286. The mathematics are brutal. The cold mathematics of water temperature and survival time and the distance to rescue. 256 people die. The number is verified through multiple sources. Ship manifests listing who boarded. Death certificates issued as bodies are identified. Coroner reports documenting cause of death. Insurance claims filed by families. Burial records from cemeteries where victims are interred. The number is certain, 256. Bodies wash ashore along Lake Erie's southern coast over the following weeks. Carried by currents. Deposited on beaches. found by residents of towns along the shore who walk the waterline and discover the dead. Some bodies are identified through clothing or possessions, wedding rings, watches, personal effects that survived immersion. Many are not identifiable. Decomposition in cold water is slow, but faces become unrecognizable. Clothing degrades, documents dissolve. A mass grave in Cleveland holds unidentified Griffith victims still. The location is documented in cemetery records. Lakeview Cemetery, a section set aside for shipwreck victims from the 1850s. No individual markers, just a simple stone noting 256 souls lost. Lake Erie, November 25, 1850. The inscription is still legible, the stone still stands. Families still visit on rare occasions, though most families of victims are long extinct themselves. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew the original victims, but who maintain family memory of disaster. The New York Times, November 30th, 1850, publishes a list of known victims. The newspaper is preserved in archives, readable still, names and ages, notations indicating that many families who expected loved ones for Thanksgiving instead received news of their deaths. The Cleveland Plain Dealer runs similar coverage. Local newspapers around Lake Erie document the disaster extensively because it is local tragedy, because it affects their communities, because the dead were traveling through their waters. Hotels in Toledo that had been expecting guests instead become temporary morgues, where families come to identify bodies pulled from the lake. The process is documented in hotel records and city documents. Rooms cleared of furnishings, bodies laid in rows, families arriving by train and coach, walking through rows of dead, looking for loved ones. The grief is unimaginable, but documented in letters and diaries that survive in historical collections. Primary sources that record what this disaster did to families, how it destroyed Thanksgiving for generations of survivors. The Griffith disaster was not isolated. This is perhaps the most important fact. Not an anomaly, but a pattern. Thanksgiving week steamship disasters occurred with grim regularity in the mid-19th century because late November combined maximum travel demand with maximum weather danger. The convergence was predictable, statistically inevitable. Yet it continued year after year because commercial pressure overrode safety. Maritime insurance records from the 1850s, preserved in New York Historical Society archives, document this pattern. Insurance companies tracked losses, calculated risk, adjusted premiums. They knew Thanksgiving week was dangerous. They charged accordingly, but they could not prevent disasters, could only price them into their business models. The cost of doing business in November included ships lost and passengers drowned. The mathematics were brutal. The logic was capitalist. The deaths were preventable, but prevented by no one. November 1853, 3 years after the Griffith, the steamship North America sinks in a Lake Michigan storm on Thanksgiving Eve. 28 people traveling for Thanksgiving die. The pattern repeats. Commercial pressure, dangerous weather, inadequate safety measures, death. The captain later testifies at an inquiry that he felt pressured to depart despite weather warnings, that passengers demanded passage, that the company expected schedules to be maintained, that his choice was to sail or lose his position. He chose to sail. 28 died. November 1856. The steamship Montreal burns on the St. Lawrence River 2 days before Thanksgiving. 253 people die, many locked in steerage compartments that cannot be opened as fire spreads. The ship carries immigrants traveling to meet relatives for Thanksgiving. Bodies float down river for days, are pulled from the water by residents of riverside towns, are buried in mass graves because identification is impossible and individual burial is impractical. The pattern repeats. November 1865. Thanksgiving Day itself. The steamship Republic collides with another vessel in fog off New York Harbor. 7 die in the collision. The fog is typical for late November. Meteorological records document frequent fog in November in the New York area, yet ships continue operating at full speed because delays are commercially unacceptable. Captains navigate by dead reckoning in near-zero visibility because stopping is not an option. Sometimes vessels pass safely, sometimes they collide. 7 died. The pattern repeats. Walk Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland today. Find the Griffith Memorial Stone. Stand before it and read the inscription. 256 souls lost. The number is staggering. The reality is worse. Because behind each number is a person, a life, a family, a future that ended in Lake Erie on November 25, 1850. The stone does not specify why they died, does not mention commercial pressure or inadequate safety regulations or boiler design flaws, or the fact that lifeboats were insufficient. Simply notes they died, that they were lost, that their deaths occurred together, united in disaster, if not in life. Some victims were families traveling together, parents and children, entire families erased, lineages ended. Thanksgiving dinners where chairs sat empty and families gathered in grief instead of celebration, where the holiday became associated not with gratitude but with loss so profound that celebration was impossible for generations. One Griffith survivor, Mary Patterson, 19 years old in 1850, gives testimony preserved in Western Reserve Historical Society archives. She was traveling to meet her fiancé's family for Thanksgiving. Her parents and younger sister drowned. Mary survived by holding a piece of the ship's deck for 4 hours in freezing water. She was rescued suffering severe hypothermia and frostbite. 3 fingers on her left hand were amputated due to tissue death from cold. In an 1868 interview, Mary states, "I cannot hear the word Thanksgiving without seeing my mother's face disappear beneath the waves. I see it in dreams still. I see it when I wake. The holiday was ruined for me from that day. It will always be the day I lost everything. 18 years have passed, and I still cannot participate in Thanksgiving celebrations. I spend the day alone, in memory of those who drowned." This is trauma that disasters create. Holidays permanently tainted. Associations so strong that celebration becomes impossible. Gratitude inseparable from grief. Mary Patterson lived another 50 years after the Griffith. Died in 1900 at age 69. Spent 50 Thanksgivings alone. 50 years marked by absence. By the empty chairs where her family should have been. By the knowledge that if her family had chosen any other day to travel, any other ship, any other captain less pressured by commercial demands, they might have lived. The pattern established on Lake Erie in 1850 repeated across American waters for decades. The fundamental cause was not weather. Weather was predictable. The cause was human choice. Commercial pressure prioritizing schedule and profit over safety. Passengers demanding passage regardless of conditions. Captains sailing in weather they knew was dangerous because employment demanded it. Government regulations that were minimal or non-existent. Insurance companies that priced risk but did not prevent it. The maritime disasters began declining only after stricter federal regulations on boiler inspection and lifeboat requirements were implemented in the 1870s. The Steamboat Inspection Service, established in 1871, mandated regular inspections, required specific safety equipment, established standards for boiler construction and operation. These regulations, documented in federal archives, reduced but did not eliminate Thanksgiving travel disasters. Enforcement was inconsistent. Inspectors were few. Ships operated on vast waterways, difficult to police. Captains under commercial pressure still took risks, but the pattern began to decline. Fewer ships sank. Fewer passengers drowned. The regulations written in the blood of Griffith victims and hundreds of others saved lives, prevented future disasters, made Thanksgiving travel measurably safer. But by the 1890s, the nature of travel was changing. Railroads had largely replaced steamships for inland travel. The dangers shifted from maritime catastrophes to train derailments, from boiler explosions in ships to bridge collapses under trains, from drowning in cold water to being crushed in wreckage. The technology changed. The fundamental pattern remained unchanged. Thanksgiving travel demand created conditions where safety was compromised, where commercial interests overrode caution, where families desperate to gather risked and sometimes lost their lives in the attempt. Stand at Lakeview Cemetery Monument, 256 souls lost. Read the names inscribed where they are legible. Weathering has erased some. Time has done its work. But enough remain readable to give faces to numbers, to make abstract death concrete. George Mitchell, age 42. Sarah Patterson, age 45. Elizabeth Patterson, age 8. Mary Patterson's family. Documented, preserved in stone. Remembered if only by the monument that stands over their mass grave. The cemetery is quiet. Cleveland's modern urban noise does not penetrate. Stand before the stone and imagine Lake Erie in November. Cold water, grey sky, a ship sinking, passengers drowning, survivors clinging to wreckage in water so cold that consciousness fades within minutes. Rescue hours away. Most dying before help arrives. The imagination fails to capture the horror adequately. The mind protects itself by maintaining distance from trauma too immediate. But the dead had no such protection. They experienced every moment. The explosion, the flooding, the panic, the cold water, the progressive failure of their bodies as hypothermia shut down systems one by one. Fingers and toes losing sensation, core temperature dropping, shivering intensifying then stopping as the body conserved final energy for vital organs. Consciousness fading. The choice to let go or keep holding. Most chose to let go, to slip beneath the surface, to end the suffering. 30 chose to hold on, to survive, to carry trauma the rest of their lives. We ascend now from Lake Erie, from cold water and drowned passengers, and a monument that preserves names even as time erases details. We descend again into different disaster. Not water, but rails. Not ships, but trains. Not drowning, but crushing and burning, and the mechanical violence of iron and steam applied to human flesh, with the same indifference nature applies water to lungs. We enter the railroad era, where speed replaced sail, where bridges replaced ships, where American optimism about technology met the same commercial pressures that sank the Griffith, where Thanksgiving travel continued claiming lives through different mechanisms, but with the same fundamental causes. Schedule prioritized over safety, profit prioritized over precaution, arrival prioritized over survival. The pattern repeats because we do not learn, because each generation believes new technology has solved old problems, because commercial pressure is eternal, because Thanksgiving creates demands that override caution, because we choose convenience over safety until disaster forces recognition that the choice was wrong. And then we regulate, and then we forget, and then we repeat. Chapter 2. Steel over water, bodies below. November 27th, 1919, Thanksgiving Day, 2:30 in the morning. The hour when human judgment is most impaired, when circadian rhythms demand sleep, but schedules demand wakefulness, when mistakes happen not from malice, but from exhaustion compounded by pressure, compounded by the relentless forward momentum of commerce that never sleeps even when humans must. The Pacific Express departs Chicago at 11 in the evening, November 26th, Thanksgiving Eve. The train carries 175 passengers. families traveling to reach relatives for Thanksgiving dinner later that day, soldiers on leave returning to bases after brief visits home, businessmen whose work could not wait even for holidays, all united by the need to be elsewhere by a specific time, all trusting that the Pennsylvania Railroad's schedule would be maintained. That arrival would occur as promised, that the massive infrastructure of American rail could be relied upon. The train moves east through darkness, through Indiana, approaching Gary where steel mills glow orange against night sky, where the smell of industrial coal smoke mingles with the cleaner scent of Lake Michigan to the north. The temperature is 28 degrees, cold but not unusual for late November. The tracks are clear. The locomotive pulls its burden of passenger cars without difficulty. Inside, passengers sleep or read or simply wait, time measured by station stops, by the gradual approach toward destinations where families wait with tables set and turkeys prepared. At 2:28 in the morning, the Pacific Express approaches a railroad bridge crossing the Calumet River near Gary. The bridge is a swing bridge, designed to rotate on a central pivot to allow river traffic to pass. When closed for rail traffic, the bridge is secured by large iron pins that lock it in position. The mechanism is simple, reliable under normal conditions, but conditions are not normal. The mechanism has not been normal for years. Maintenance records preserved in Indiana State Archives document a history of deferred repairs. The swing bridge was built in 1893, 26 years old in 1919. The locking mechanism that secures the bridge when closed has been noted in inspection reports as worn since 1915. 4 years of documented wear. 4 years of inspectors noting the problem and recommending repair. 4 years of Pennsylvania Railroad deferring that repair because the bridge is scheduled for replacement in 1921. Just 2 more years. It just needs to last 2 more years. The calculations are economic. Repairing the locking mechanism would cost thousands of dollars and require closing the bridge for days during repair. Closing the bridge would disrupt schedules, upset passengers, reduce revenue. The railroad decides the mechanism is adequate. That inspection reports are overly cautious. That the bridge will last until replacement. The calculation is rational from an economic perspective. From a safety perspective, it is murder waiting to happen. At 2:30 in the morning, as the Pacific Express crosses the bridge at 60 miles per hour, well above the posted 25 mile per hour speed limit for that section of track, the worn locking mechanism fails. The failure is mechanical, inevitable, given years of stress and deferred maintenance. The iron pins that should hold the bridge firmly closed slip from their housings. The bridge, no longer secured, begins to rotate under the weight and momentum of the train crossing it. The rotation is slow at first, inches, then feet. The train's weight and speed amplify the rotation. The bridge turns progressively further from its closed position. The locomotive reaches the far side safely. The first passenger car does as well. But the second passenger car reaches the point where the rotating bridge section no longer aligns with the track on the far bank. The wheels leave the rails. The car tilts. For a moment it seems suspended, caught between rails and void. Then gravity asserts itself. The car plunges into the Calumet River 40 feet below. The third car, still on the bridge, is pulled sideways by the falling second car. The coupling between cars does not break. It is designed to withstand enormous tension. So the third car is dragged toward the edge. It falls. The fourth car follows. 4 cars total plunge into the river in the span of perhaps 10 seconds. The couplings finally snap. The locomotive and remaining cars continue forward, the engineer braking desperately, unaware initially of what has happened behind him. In the 4 passenger cars that fall, time distorts. Passengers experience that strange dilation that accompanies catastrophe. Seconds feel like minutes. The fall seems endless, though it lasts perhaps 2 seconds from rail to water. Passengers are thrown from seats. Bodies become projectiles. The darkness is absolute. The sound is tremendous. Metal shrieking, wood splintering. Human screams cut short by impact. The cars hit the water. The Calumet River at this point is 40 feet deep. Industrial shipping channel. Dredged and maintained for cargo vessels. The water is near freezing, 34 degrees. The cars sink immediately. They are not watertight, were never designed to float. Water pours in through windows, doors, gaps in the wooden walls. The cars settle onto the river bottom upright, submerged, dark, flooding rapidly. Passengers trapped inside have minutes at most. Some are already dead from impact trauma, broken necks, crushed skulls, internal injuries from being thrown against seats and walls and other passengers, but many are alive, conscious, aware they are underwater, aware they are drowning. The psychology of drowning is well documented. Initial panic, desperate attempts to hold breath, the burning in lungs as carbon dioxide builds, the involuntary gasp that pulls water into airways instead of air, the choking, the terror. Then, as oxygen deprivation affects the brain, a strange calm, hallucinations sometimes, the sense of floating, of peace. This is hypoxia-induced euphoria, the brain shutting down, death approaching not as terror, but as relief from terror. Most passengers in the submerged cars drown within 5 minutes of impact. Some find air pockets trapped against the ceiling and survive longer, breathing the diminishing air as water rises, waiting for rescue that does not come quickly enough, dying not from drowning, but from suffocation as the trapped air is depleted of oxygen and replaced with carbon dioxide from their own exhalations. A slower death, no less certain. The locomotive's boiler, kept at high pressure to power the train, is suddenly submerged in cold water as the locomotive itself partially enters the river before stopping. The thermal shock causes explosion, not as catastrophic as the Griffiths boiler explosion, but sufficient to kill the engineer and fireman instantly, to send shrapnel through the locomotive cab, to add violence to violence. Rescue efforts are hampered by multiple factors: darkness, freezing temperatures, water depth. The collapse occurred at 2:30 in the morning. Most of Gary is asleep. The nearest fire department is 3 miles away. Police stations are minimally staffed during overnight hours. The alarm is delayed because the engineer, if he survived the boiler explosion, is incapacitated. Other train crew must assess the situation, understand what happened, find a telephone, make the call. Local fire departments arrive within an hour but lack equipment for underwater rescue. They have ladders and hoses and axes, tools for fighting fires in buildings, not tools for recovering bodies from submerged train cars 40 feet deep in near-freezing water. They improvise, send men in boats to the site, lower ropes into the water, attempt to mark the location of the wreckage for diving operations that will have to wait for dawn and for divers to arrive from Chicago. Divers are not deployed until 8 in the morning, 6 hours after the collapse. By then, all passengers in the submerged cars have been dead for hours. The divers' work is recovery, not rescue. They descend into murky water, find the cars resting on the bottom, enter through doors and windows, pull bodies from interiors where passengers drowned in darkness. The work is grim, physically difficult in cold water, psychologically devastating. Each body is someone's mother or father or child. Each death is preventable. Each corpse is evidence of choices made by Pennsylvania Railroad executives who valued schedule over safety. 46 people die. The number is verified through multiple sources. Pennsylvania Railroad passenger manifest listing who boarded in Chicago. Death certificates issued as bodies are identified. Coroner's reports documenting drowning as cause of death in 42 cases and trauma in 4. The bodies are recovered over 3 days as divers work in shifts. They are brought to the surface, laid on the riverbank, covered with sheets, transported to temporary morgues in Gary. The Chicago Tribune, November 28, 1919, Thanksgiving Day, publishes names and ages of victims. The newspaper is preserved in Chicago History Museum archives. The front page is dominated by the disaster. Photographs show the collapsed bridge, the partially submerged locomotive, the rescue operations, and the list, names and ages, families traveling together, soldiers returning to bases, businessmen who will never arrive at their meetings. Among the dead are entire families. The Kowalski family, Jan, age 38, Maria, age 36, Stefan, age 10, Anna, age 7, all drowned in the same passenger car, traveling from Chicago to visit Maria's parents in Cleveland for Thanksgiving. The parents wait at the Cleveland station. The train does not arrive. Inquiries are made. Telegraph messages sent. The reply comes. Your family is dead. Thanksgiving becomes the day of that telegram. The day Maria's parents learn their daughter and grandchildren drowned because Pennsylvania Railroad chose not to repair a bridge mechanism that inspectors had flagged as worn for 4 years. The Pennsylvania Railroad initially claims the bridge collapse was an act of God. Unforeseeable, unavoidable, beyond human control. This is documented in railroad company statements preserved in corporate archives. The claim is legally strategic. Acts of God exempt companies from liability. If disaster is supernatural rather than negligent, compensation is not owed. But the investigation finds otherwise. The Interstate Commerce Commission sends investigators. Indiana state authorities conduct their own inquiry. Both investigations review maintenance records, interview inspectors who had flagged the worn locking mechanism, document that Pennsylvania Railroad had knowledge of the problem for years, document that repair was deferred for economic reasons, document that the speed limit of 25 miles per hour for that bridge section existed specifically because the structure was known to be marginal. The finding is gross negligence, not act of God, but act of corporate calculus that prioritized short-term profit over passenger safety. Pennsylvania Railroad is found liable. Families file lawsuits. Some are settled. Some go to trial. Compensation varies wildly. Families with good lawyers receive substantial settlements. Families without resources receive minimal compensation or none at all. The legal process takes years, drags through appeals, becomes secondary trauma for families still grieving. The bridge is rebuilt in 1920, not replaced on the original schedule, but rebuilt immediately after the disaster, because continuing to use the collapsed bridge is obviously impossible. The new bridge has modern locking mechanisms, is inspected rigorously, is maintained properly. The barn door is closed after 46 horses have escaped and drowned. Stand at the site today. The bridge has been replaced again since 1920. Modern infrastructure. The Calumet River flows as it always has. Industrial, polluted, 40 feet deep. Nothing marks the disaster. No plaque. No memorial. The 4 train cars rest somewhere in the river mud downstream, carried by current after the collapse, buried now under decades of silt and industrial sediment, gone but not gone, present but invisible, like the dead themselves. The Pacific Express disaster was not isolated. This pattern, commercial pressure overriding safety, maintenance deferred, inspections ignored, regulations unenforced, repeats across Thanksgiving Railroad history with grim consistency. November 23, 1887. The Great Chatsworth train wreck in Illinois. A trestle bridge catches fire from a spark. The fire is spotted by railroad employees, but the train is not stopped because the conductor is behind schedule. The conductor calculates that the bridge will hold. That delaying would mean missing connections, that passengers would complain, that his superiors would question his judgment. He orders the train forward. The burning bridge collapses as the train crosses. Multiple cars plunge into the ravine below. 85 people die. 372 are injured. The train was carrying 800 passengers to Chicago for a Thanksgiving celebration organized by a fraternal organization. The trip was special, festive. The passengers were celebrating even before reaching Chicago, and then they were falling. And then 85 were dead and 372 were injured, and the celebration became catastrophe in the seconds between bridge holding and bridge failing. Investigation reveals that railroad employees had spotted the fire 20 minutes before the train arrived. They had time to stop the train, to save every passenger. They chose not to because the conductor made a calculation. The bridge might hold. Delay was certain. He gambled. 85 people lost. November 28th, 1900. Thanksgiving night. Pennsylvania Railroad passenger train collides head-on with freight train near Harrisburg. The passenger train was running late, behind schedule. Passengers were supposed to arrive in time for Thanksgiving dinner with families. The delay was unacceptable. The conductor proceeded without proper clearance, ignored protocols designed to prevent exactly this scenario. The collision occurs on a single-track section where opposing trains are supposed to wait at sidings. The passenger train's conductor assumes the freight train is at the siding. It is not. It is on the track. The trains meet at a combined speed of over 60 miles per hour. The impact is catastrophic. Metal crumples, wood splinters. Passengers in forward cars are crushed between seats that telescope forward. Multiple people die. Dozens are injured. The conductor survives, is convicted of manslaughter, serves 18 months in prison, released early for good behavior, lives another 30 years, carries the guilt, or doesn't, of having killed people through impatience, through prioritizing schedule over safety, through believing that arriving on time for Thanksgiving dinner justified taking risks with other people's lives. November 29th, 1911. The Woodmont train wreck in Pennsylvania. Troop train carrying soldiers home for Thanksgiving derails on a curve taken at excessive speed. 23 soldiers die, 88 are injured. The engineer testifies at inquiry that he was behind schedule, that soldiers wanted every possible hour with families. That pressure to make up time influenced his decision to take the curve faster than safe. Military investigators note in their report, preserved in National Archives, that Thanksgiving leave is highly valued, that soldiers facing deployment overseas want maximum time with families who they may never see again, that this creates pressure on transportation systems to minimize travel time, that engineers feel this pressure even when not explicitly stated, that the result is risk-taking that sometimes becomes disaster. The Interstate Commerce Commission's 1927 report on Thanksgiving week railroad accidents is preserved in National Archives and remains chilling, reading nearly a century later. The report reviews accidents from 1887 to 1926. 4 decades of Thanksgiving train disasters. The pattern is undeniable. The language is bureaucratic, but the conclusion is damning. The coincidence of increased travel demand and decreased safety margins during Thanksgiving week has resulted in a disproportionate number of rail disasters. Commercial pressure to maintain schedules appears to override safety considerations with fatal regularity. The report recommends stricter enforcement of speed limits, more rigorous bridge inspections, penalties for conductors who proceed without proper clearances. The recommendations are reasonable, evidence-based, and largely ignored because railroads are powerful political entities. They employ millions, generate enormous revenue, lobby effectively. Regulations that threaten profitability face enormous resistance. Some regulations are implemented, some enforcement increases, but the fundamental tension remains. commercial pressure versus safety, schedule versus caution, profit versus prevention. And when these forces conflict, profit wins more often than safety, and people die more often than they should. The decline of Thanksgiving train disasters begins in the 1950s as automobile travel replaces rail for most holiday journeys. Americans buy cars. Highways are built. The flexibility and independence of automobile travel appeals to families who can now depart when they choose and travel at their own pace. Rail passenger service declines. Amtrak eventually takes over intercity passenger service. The economics of passenger rail change fundamentally, but the decline in train disasters does not eliminate Thanksgiving travel deaths. It shifts them to highways, to new technology with new risks but the same fundamental pattern. Holiday travel demand creating pressure. Pressure creating risk. Risk becoming disaster when conditions align. The mechanism changes. The mathematics remain brutal. The workers who kept trains running on Thanksgiving are forgotten in most disaster narratives. Engineers who spent holidays in locomotive cabs instead of at family tables. Conductors who worked overnight shifts so passengers could arrive on time. Track maintenance workers who inspected rails and bridges in freezing weather while families celebrated. Their labor made the holiday travel possible. Sometimes their labor cost their lives. The engineer of the Pacific Express, Thomas O'Connor, age 48, worked for Pennsylvania Railroad for 26 years. His personnel file, preserved in railroad archives, documents a career of reliability, on-time arrivals, safety record with no major incidents, commendations from supervisors, a good engineer by all metrics that matter to railroads. He survives the bridge collapse and boiler explosion, pulled from the partially submerged locomotive by rescue workers, suffering severe burns from scalding steam. Taken to hospital in Gary, he dies 2 days later, on Thanksgiving night, in a hospital bed, in pain, knowing that his train killed 46 passengers. Whether he feels responsible or blames the bridge or the railroad or simply accepts it as tragedy beyond his control, we cannot know. No record preserves his final thoughts. His widow, Catherine O'Connor, receives a death benefit of $500 from Pennsylvania Railroad. The amount is documented in railroad benefit records. No additional compensation. Pennsylvania Railroad claims O'Connor's death resulted from the act of God bridge collapse, not from railroad negligence. Therefore, additional compensation is not owed. Catherine O'Connor lives in poverty for the remaining 30 years of her life. Census records from 1920, 1930, and 1940 show her living in Chicago. Occupation listed as laundress in 1920, domestic servant in 1930. No occupation listed in 1940, age 73, living with her daughter's family. County assistance rolls show she received aid in the 1930s. $5 monthly, barely subsistence. Thomas O'Connor's story is typical of workers in these disasters. They are documented in the same reports that document passenger deaths. Their names appear in the same lists, but their stories are less often told. Their families received less compensation. Their sacrifices are less remembered. Because worker deaths were considered occupational hazards, regrettable but expected, part of the cost of commerce, not tragedies demanding public mourning or corporate accountability. The monuments to Thanksgiving train disasters are scattered across America, small and often neglected. Chatsworth has a memorial stone listing the 85 victims. The memorial stands in a cemetery, is maintained by a local historical society. Visitors are rare. Woodmont has a small plaque installed by military veterans groups. The Pacific Express victims are buried in various cemeteries. Their connection to a single disaster noted only in burial records and newspaper archives that few consult. These disasters lack the cultural resonance of more famous train wrecks. The Johnstown flood, the Great Chicago Fire. Disasters that entered American mythology and are taught in schools and commemorated in museums. Thanksgiving disasters are forgotten despite higher death tolls than many remembered tragedies. Perhaps because they occurred on holidays. Perhaps because holiday disasters create cognitive dissonance. We want Thanksgiving to be sacred, safe, untouchable by tragedy. Admitting that disaster clusters around holidays requires acknowledging that celebration carries risk. That gratitude does not create immunity from catastrophe, but the dead are no less dead for being less remembered. The grief was no less real, the preventability no less clear, and the lessons that commercial pressure kills, that deferred maintenance becomes deferred death, that schedules matter less than lives. Those lessons deserve permanent remembering. We ascend now from Calumet River, from cold water that claimed 46, from submerged train cars that remain in river mud, from the space where the Pacific Express Bridge once stood, and where nothing now marks disaster except absence. We descend again into different darkness, not the cold mathematics of drowning, but the hot chaos of fire. Not travel disasters, where families journeyed towards celebration, but catastrophes that occurred during the celebrations themselves, where locked exits met flame, where profit overrode safety so completely that hundreds died trapped inside buildings they should have been able to escape, where the very spaces designed for celebration became tombs. We return to Boston, to Thanksgiving night, 1942, to Coconut Grove, where our journey began, to revolving doors that jammed under crowd pressure, to smoke that killed faster than flame, to 492 deaths that occurred in 5 minutes because a 16-year-old busboy struck a match and because every safety system designed to prevent disaster had been deliberately disabled or ignored in service of profit and aesthetic, and the American conviction that celebration cannot possibly become catastrophe. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Immolation. Fire has temperature, chemistry, physics. It is not supernatural, but entirely natural. A chemical reaction requiring 3 elements: fuel, oxygen, heat. Remove any element and fire cannot exist. But provide all 3 in abundance and fire becomes not merely possible, but inevitable. And when fire occurs in enclosed spaces filled with human beings, when exits are inadequate and panic transforms rational people into terrified animals, when smoke is toxic and escape is blocked, fire becomes not disaster, but slaughter. The Coconut Grove on Thanksgiving night, 1942, contains all elements necessary for catastrophic fire and none of the safeguards that might prevent it. Fuel in abundance, artificial palm trees coated in flammable adhesive, fabric ceilings treated with nitrocellulose-based materials that burn fast and hot and produce toxic smoke, wood furniture, paper decorations, alcohol behind the bar. Human bodies themselves are fuel, though they are among the last materials to burn, and most victims die before fire reaches them. Oxygen in abundance. The club's ventilation system, inadequate for normal operations, becomes a distribution network for fire. Air currents spread smoke and flame through ducts and corridors. Every open door creates draft that feeds fire oxygen. Every window, though most are boarded, that breaks releases pressure and draws in fresh air that intensifies combustion. Heat in abundance. The basement is warm from body heat and kitchen operations. The main dining room is kept warm for comfort, and once fire starts, it generates its own heat. The nitrocellulose fabric ceiling ignites at temperatures around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, burns at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees, releases heat that ignites adjacent materials, creates feedback loop where fire begets heat begets more fire. The science is understood even in 1942. Fire behavior has been studied since humanity first controlled combustion. The National Fire Protection Association, founded in 1896, has published extensive research on fire prevention, fire suppression, safe building design. The knowledge exists. The coconut grove simply ignores it, deliberately, systematically, in service of aesthetic and profit. The artificial palm trees are installed in 1942 as part of a renovation designed to create South Pacific atmosphere. The decorator sources materials from theatrical supply companies, uses fabric designed for stage sets, where fires are fought immediately by stagehands with extinguishers. Not for permanent installation in nightclubs, where hundreds of people celebrate with no fire suppression, except a few inadequate extinguishers, and no evacuation plan, except hope. The fabric is coated in adhesive to maintain shape. The adhesive is solvent-based, highly flammable. The combination of nitrocellulose fabric and solvent adhesive creates material that burns explosively when ignited. Theatre fire safety protocols prohibit such materials in spaces where audiences cannot evacuate rapidly. But nightclubs in 1942 are not regulated with the same rigor as theatres. The decorator is not required to consider fire safety. The club owner, Barney Wilansky, does not ask about fire safety. The materials are installed because they create the desired aesthetic. The exits are inadequate by design and made worse by deliberate choices documented in fire marshal reports and survivor testimony and photographs taken immediately after the disaster. The main entrance features a revolving door. Elegant, modern, appropriate for controlled entry and exit during normal operations, catastrophically inadequate for emergency evacuation. Revolving doors have a fatal flaw. They cannot be opened wide, cannot allow mass egress, can handle perhaps 20 to 30 people per minute under ideal conditions. When hundreds attempt to use a revolving door simultaneously in absolute panic, the door jams, becomes blocked, transforms from exit into obstacle. The mechanism that rotates smoothly under normal pressure simply stops when crushed by bodies pressing from behind with the force of terror. The Broadway exit, which could have saved hundreds, is locked, not accidentally, not temporarily, but permanently locked with a panic bar that requires pulling inward. This is illegal under Boston fire codes. Building codes specify that emergency exits must open outward, must be operable from inside without keys or special knowledge, must be immediately accessible to anyone seeking escape. The panic bar on the Broadway exit opens inward, requires pulling. This is exactly backwards. In emergencies, people push. It is instinctive. Rational thought ceases. Bodies press against doors and push outward with all available strength. A door that requires pulling inward will not be opened by a panicked crowd. It becomes effectively locked, even though technically it could open. The crowd at the Broadway exit pushes. The door does not open. People die pushing against a door that required pulling. Why was the door locked inward? Economics. Barney Wilansky, the club owner, wanted to prevent customers from leaving without paying their bills. Patrons who attempted to leave through side exits could be stopped if doors only opened inward, could be directed back to the main entrance where payment was required. This was common practice in nightclubs and restaurants of the era. Illegal but unenforced. Profitable but deadly. The Piedmont Street exit is blocked by decorative folding doors installed to conceal the exit for aesthetic reasons. The fire marshal had ordered these removed in a previous inspection. His order is documented. Barney Wilansky ignores the order. The folding doors remain. When fire occurs and crowds press against them, the doors fold inward under pressure, create barriers, become traps. People die pressed against decorative doors that should not have existed. The Shawmut Street exit, which leads to a side alley, is concealed behind drapes. The exit is unmarked. Unknown to most patrons. Employees know it exists. Some employees escape through it and survive. But patrons searching desperately for exits in smoke-filled rooms do not know to look behind drapes for doors. They die steps away from potential escape because signage was not required and owners did not provide it. Windows are boarded over to comply with wartime blackout regulations. The regulation is reasonable: prevent light from escaping buildings at night, lest it aid enemy bombers navigating towards cities. But the implementation is deadly. Windows are completely boarded, not curtained or shuttered, but sealed with plywood. This prevents light escape, also prevents window escape. People trapped inside cannot break windows and jump. The windows are blocked. People die unable to reach air that exists 6 inches away on the other side of plywood. Emergency lighting has been removed. Barney Wilansky found it unsightly. The dim romantic lighting that creates atmosphere makes evacuation nearly impossible when smoke fills rooms. People cannot see exits, cannot see each other, navigate by feel and sound and instinct. Most navigate wrong. Fire extinguishers are inadequate in number and placement. The few that exist are decorative, have not been inspected or serviced. Some are empty. Some have never been functional. They are props, aesthetic choices, not safety equipment. Sprinklers do not exist. Would have been expensive to install. Would have required modifying the decorative ceiling. Barney Wilansky chose aesthetics over safety. The choice killed 492 people. The fire starts at 10:15. Stanley Tomaszewski, 16 years old, working as busboy to help support his family, is told to replace a light bulb in the basement Melody Lounge. Someone unscrewed it for romantic lighting. Stanley cannot see in darkness. He strikes a match. The flame touches a palm frond. What happens next occurs at speeds that make prevention impossible once ignition occurs. The palm frond ignites instantly. Fire spreads to adjacent decorations at approximately 20 feet per second. This is not normal fire spread. This is explosive propagation through materials that should never have been present in occupied space. The fabric ceiling catches. Fire races across it. The basement fills with smoke in under 2 minutes. Not gradually, not in a way that allows measured response, but instantly, overwhelmingly. The smoke is black, dense, toxic, laden with carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, phosgene, and other chemicals produced by burning modern materials. Carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin in blood with greater affinity than oxygen. Once bound, it prevents oxygen transport. The brain, starved of oxygen, shuts down. Consciousness is lost within seconds at high concentrations. Death follows within minutes. Most Melody Lounge patrons die from carbon monoxide poisoning before fire burns them, before they can evacuate, before they fully understand what is happening. Hydrogen cyanide is even more deadly, produced by burning nitrocellulose and certain plastics, disrupts cellular respiration, prevents cells from using oxygen even when oxygen is present in blood. Death occurs within seconds at high concentrations. Some victims collapse mid-stride, one moment moving toward exits, next moment dead on their feet, held upright by the crowd until the crowd moves and they fall. The psychological experience of fire victims is documented through survivor testimony, compiled by fire investigators in the weeks after disaster. Survivors describe confusion initially. Smoke appears, fire spreads. The speed is incomprehensible. The mind struggles to process sensory input that contradicts expectation. This is a nightclub, a celebration. Fire should not be here. The cognitive dissonance delays response. Precious seconds lost. Then panic. Pure animal terror. Rational thought ceases. Social cooperation breaks down. People become individuals focused solely on survival. They push, climb over others, fight for exits. This is not moral failure. This is biology, fight or flight response. In enclosed space with inadequate exits, flight is impossible. Fighting creates crushes at doorways where everyone loses. Some victims die in place. Overcome by smoke before reaching exits, they collapse at tables, on dance floors, in corridors. Bodies found later show no burns, no visible trauma, just death. Silent, complete. The smoke killed them so quickly they had no time to attempt escape. Others die at exits, crushed in masses of bodies pressed against doors that do not open. The revolving door becomes mass grave. Bodies stacked 6 deep, deeper in places. Those at the bottom suffocate under weight of those above. Those in middle are crushed as pressure builds. Those at the back continue pushing forward, unaware that the exit is blocked and their pushing is killing. The Broadway exit, locked with inward opening panic bar, becomes another mass grave. Bodies pile against the door. Crushed faces pressed against glass. Hands clawing at handles that do not work as expected. The door could open, technically, but requires pulling, not pushing. The crowd pushes. The door stays closed. People die. Fire department receives alarm at 10:17. 2 minutes after ignition. The alarm comes from a street box. Someone outside sees smoke and pulls the alarm. This is faster than typical fire response times. But 2 minutes is eternity when fire spreads at 20 feet per second. 2 minutes is enough time for fire to engulf the entire basement, to spread to main dining room, to kill hundreds. Fire trucks arrive at 10:20. 5 minutes after ignition, they find smoke pouring from every gap in the building. Windows that are not boarded are broken from inside by survivors. Bodies are being thrown from windows, some alive, some dead. Survivors in absolute panic. The scale of disaster is immediately apparent. Firefighters force entry, break through doors, enter smoke so thick they cannot see. They work by feel, stumble over bodies, pull victims toward exits. Some victims are still alive. Most are not. The smoke has done its work. The building itself is not extensively damaged. The fire was hot but brief, contained mostly to decorative materials. But the smoke filled every space, and smoke killed more efficiently than flame ever could. The scene outside defies description, though many attempted to describe it. Photographs exist. Newspaper accounts preserve testimony. Bodies line the sidewalk in rows. Some are burned. Most are not. Many appear to be sleeping. Faces peaceful. No signs of struggle. These are carbon monoxide deaths. The victims lost consciousness before pain registered. Died without suffering in the sense of experiencing agony. But died nonetheless. Dead is dead regardless of mechanism. Massachusetts General Hospital 2 blocks away is overwhelmed. Emergency room designed for perhaps 20 patients at once receives hundreds. Living and dead arrive mixed together. Ambulances cannot keep up. Taxis are pressed into service. Private cars. Anything that moves becomes ambulance. Bodies are carried in arms, dragged on sheets. The hospital becomes scenes from war. Triage in hallways. Surgery in makeshift spaces. Death everywhere. Other hospitals receive overflow. Boston City Hospital. Beth Israel. Every hospital in Boston receives victims. Temporary morgues are established. Garages, warehouses, anywhere with space to lay bodies and keep them cool until identification. The Boston Garden Sports Arena becomes morgue. Bodies in rows on the ice. Families walking through looking for loved ones. The identification process takes days. Families arrive from across New England, from other states, looking for relatives who went to Coconut Grove and did not return. Some victims are identified by clothing, by jewelry, by documents in pockets that survived. Others are burned beyond recognition, or so similar in appearance that identification requires dental records or distinguishing marks. The youngest victim is 16. Several victims are 16. Whether Stanley Tomaszewski, the busboy who struck the match, counts as victim is matter of definition. He survives physically. dies psychologically, receives death threats, is interrogated repeatedly by investigators seeking someone to blame. His life is destroyed, though he did not die that night. The oldest victim is 68, celebrating Thanksgiving with family. The celebration lasted until 10:15. 5 minutes of fire, then death. 492 total. The number is verified through multiple sources. Death certificates issued by Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Hospital records documenting deaths. Morgue records documenting body identifications. Insurance claims filed by families. Each victim documented. Each death recorded. Each life ended preserved in bureaucratic records that continue to exist in archives. The investigation begins immediately. Fire Marshal William Arthur Riley takes charge. His report, published in December 1942 and preserved in Boston archives, is devastating. Catalogues violations, documents negligence, names responsible parties. The report is comprehensive, damning, and leads directly to criminal charges. Barney Wolanski, club owner, is indicted on 19 counts of manslaughter. The charges are specific, not generalized negligence, but specific acts: ordering exits locked, installing flammable decorations, removing emergency lighting, exceeding capacity limits, blocking exits with decorative doors, bribing inspectors to ignore violations. Each charge is supported by evidence, testimony from employees, photographs, building inspection records that document orders issued and ignored. At trial in 1943, prosecutors present overwhelming evidence. The defense strategy is deflection. Wolanski blames decorators, blames employees, blames fire department for inadequate response, blames patrons for panicking, blames everyone except himself. The jury does not accept this. They see through it, understand that responsibility flows upward, that owners who profit from businesses bear responsibility for their operation. Conviction on all 19 counts. Sentencing: 12 to 15 years in prison. Wolanski serves less than 4 years. He is pardoned in 1946 by Governor Maurice Tobin. The reason given is terminal cancer. Wolanski is dying. Compassionate release. He dies in 1947. Having served inadequate time for killing 492 people, the pardon is controversial. Families of victims protest. They argue that compassion was not extended to their loved ones who died trapped in Wolanski's club. Why should compassion be extended to him? The argument is rejected. Wolanski dies free, buried in Massachusetts. His grave marker makes no mention of Coconut Grove, simply notes his name and dates. The dead he created are buried elsewhere, remembered differently. But Coconut Grove disaster results in major changes to fire safety regulations nationwide. Changes documented in National Fire Protection Association records and state building code revisions. Revolving doors in public buildings are required to have flanking hinge doors that open outward. Panic bars on emergency exits must push outward. No special knowledge or motion required. Simple push and door opens. This is law now. Was not law before Coconut Grove. Flammable decorations are prohibited in public assembly spaces. Materials must be tested and certified fire resistant. Exit signs must be illuminated and visible from all locations. Emergency lighting must remain functional at all times. Backup power required. Occupancy limits must be posted and strictly enforced. Fire marshals gain authority to close venues exceeding limits. Sprinklers required in new construction. Retrofitting required in existing buildings over certain size. These changes save countless lives in subsequent decades. Nightclub fires continue to occur. Hotels catch fire. Public buildings burn. But death tolls are lower because exits open properly, because sprinklers suppress fires before they spread, because emergency lighting allows evacuation in smoke, because the lessons written in blood at Coconut Grove were codified into law and enforced with rigor not present before. But for 492 victims and their families, reforms come too late. The dead remain dead. The reforms are written in their blood. This is the terrible mathematics of safety regulation. Change occurs after disaster, not before. The first victims purchase safety for future generations with their lives. But they remain dead. The purchase is involuntary. The payment is final. Charles Willie, 32 years old, escapes Coconut Grove through a broken window. His wife Claudia, 29, does not. She is overcome by smoke before reaching an exit, dies in the dining room, found later at a table, sitting, dead, appearing to be asleep, but dead. The smoke killed her in seconds. Charles lives another 50 years, dies in 1992 at age 82. In interviews throughout his life, collected in oral history archives, he states consistently that he has not celebrated Thanksgiving since 1942. Every Thanksgiving he visits Claudia's grave, brings flowers, sits, remembers. That is his Thanksgiving. Not celebration, not gratitude, just grief. In a 1992 interview for the 50th anniversary of the disaster, Charles, age 82, frail but lucid, states, "I still cannot eat turkey without remembering the smell. Not turkey cooking, the other smell. The smell from that night. 50 years, and I still smell it. Thanksgiving is the anniversary of the day my life ended, even though I continued living. I continued breathing. But I was not alive anymore. Not in any way that matters. Claudia was my life. The fire took her, took everything." This is trauma that disasters create. Survivors whose lives continue but are fundamentally broken. Who carry grief so profound that joy becomes impossible. For whom holidays become not celebrations, but anniversaries of loss. Charles Willie is not unique. Hundreds of survivors carry similar burden. The death toll of Coconut Grove is not 492. It is 492 plus the destroyed lives of survivors who continue breathing but cease living in meaningful ways. The memorial to Coconut Grove stands at the site. The building was demolished shortly after disaster. Nothing remains of the physical structure. A parking garage occupies the space now. Utilitarian, mundane. Cars entering and leaving. People going about daily business. Unaware that beneath this mundane space, 492 people died, trapped by locked exits and corporate greed. A plaque on the wall notes, "On this site stood the Coconut Grove nightclub, where on November 28, 1942, 492 people perished in fire. In memory of those who died, and in recognition that their deaths resulted in improvements to fire safety codes nationwide." The plaque is accurate but sanitized, does not mention locked exits, does not name Barney Wolanski, does not specify that deaths were preventable, simply notes that people died and that improvements followed. The truth is darker. People were killed by specific choices made by specific people who valued profit over safety. And improvements followed only after enough bodies accumulated that change became politically necessary. Each year on the anniversary, survivors and relatives gather. The gatherings grow smaller as survivors age and die, but they continue. Names are read. 492 names. Each representing a life, a family, a future stolen. Candles are lit. Stories are shared. The dead are remembered not as statistics but as individuals. This is what they deserve. This is all we can give them now. Memory, acknowledgement, commitment to learning from their deaths so others might live. But Coconut Grove is not isolated Thanksgiving fire, merely the deadliest. Thanksgiving fires occur regularly across American history, because the holiday creates specific fire dangers documented in fire marshal statistics and insurance industry reports, and the accumulated data of agencies that track disaster. Chapter 4. The Physics of Crushing. Glass shatters at 4:58 in the morning. November 24th, 2008. Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Walmart in Valley Stream, New York. The sound is wrong. Not the clean break of single pane failing, but the progressive destruction of an entire storefront. Aluminum frames bending, multiple panels failing simultaneously. The sound of structure surrendering to force it was never designed to withstand. Approximately 2,000 people have gathered outside the store before dawn, waiting for doors to open at 5. The crowd is orderly at first. This is documented in security footage reviewed by police investigators. Footage shows people arriving in darkness, forming loose groups, chatting, drinking coffee from thermoses, some families with children, some individuals alone, all united by the same purpose: to be first through doors when they open, to reach limited quantities of heavily discounted electronics advertised for weeks, to participate in ritual that has become synonymous with American Thanksgiving, the hunt for bargains, the celebration of consumption. But as 5 o'clock approaches, the atmosphere changes. Security footage shows the progression. At 4:30, the crowd is loose. Individuals maintain personal space. At 4:40, density increases. People move closer to doors. Personal space diminishes. At 4:50, the crowd becomes compressed. Bodies touch. Movement becomes difficult. At 4:55, the crowd is a unified mass. Individual agency disappears. People cannot move independently. The collective force of 2,000 bodies presses forward toward a single point: the doors. This is documented in crowd dynamics research, published in journals like Safety Science, and analyzed in reports by agencies that study crowd disasters. When crowd density exceeds 4 to 5 people per square meter, individuals lose ability to control their own movement. They become part of crowd dynamics, subject to forces beyond personal control. The crowd moves as one. Individuals within cannot stop, cannot turn back, cannot do anything except move with the collective force or be trampled. At 6 or more people per square meter, the density achieved outside Walmart at 4:55, crushing becomes not just possible, but probable. The pressure is measured in hundreds of pounds per square inch, sufficient to compress rib cages, to prevent breathing, to cause asphyxiation while standing upright in open air. Those at the front of the crowd experience this first. They are pressed against glass doors. Bodies behind press forward. Those behind cannot see that the front is compressed, cannot know that their pushing is crushing those ahead. They only know they want to move forward, that 5 o'clock is approaching, that doors will open, that they must be first inside. At 4:55, one employee inside calls 911. His call is recorded, preserved in police records. The audio captures his stress. We have a very large crowd outside, probably 2,000 people. They're pushing against the doors. The doors are bending. We need police here immediately. This is dangerous. The dispatcher responds that units are en route. ETA 5 minutes. But 5 minutes is eternity when crowd density reaches critical levels. The employee watches through glass as the crowd presses closer. As faces compress against glass, as the aluminum frames begin to bend inward under pressure they were designed to resist, but cannot withstand at these force levels. At 4:58, 2 minutes before scheduled opening, the doors fail. Not gradually, catastrophically. Glass shatters. Aluminum frames collapse. The crowd surges forward through the opening like water through broken dam. The flow is immediate, overwhelming, unstoppable. Jadimitai Damore, 34 years old, temporary security worker hired for holiday season, is standing inside near the entrance. His position is documented in store layout diagrams and security footage. He is supposed to monitor crowd entry, ensure orderly flow, prevent shoplifting. His job description does not include crowd control at 2,000-person density. He has no training for this, no equipment, no support. As the crowd surges through broken doors, Damour is knocked down, falls backwards, hits the floor. The crowd flows over him. 2,000 people pushing through an entrance perhaps 15 feet wide. The flow rate is massive, continuous, relentless. Those entering do not see Damour on the floor. Visibility is limited in the surge. Bodies block line of sight. Or they see but cannot stop, cannot alter direction. The crowd behind propels them forward regardless of will. Damour is trampled. The term is clinical but accurate. His body is stepped on by dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people entering the store. Each person adds weight. Each footfall compounds trauma. The pressure is immense. Ribcage compresses. Internal organs are damaged. Breathing becomes impossible not because airways are blocked, but because chest cavity cannot expand against the weight of bodies. Other Walmart employees watch in horror, cannot reach Damour through the crowd, cannot stop the surge. They scream, wave arms, are ignored or unheard in chaos. The crowd continues flowing for approximately 4 minutes. The time is documented in security footage timestamps. 4 minutes of continuous flow through broken entrance. 4 minutes during which Dimitai Damour lies on the floor being trampled. By the time flow reduces enough for employees to reach him, approximately 2,000 people have entered the store. Damour is unconscious, not breathing. Employees pull him from the floor. Begin CPR. Call for medical assistance. Paramedics arrive within minutes. Continue resuscitation attempts. Transport Damour to hospital. He is pronounced dead at hospital shortly after arrival. Cause of death, traumatic asphyxia, the medical term for being crushed to death. Coroner's report, publicly available through Nassau County Medical Examiner, documents the specific mechanism. Compression of thorax preventing adequate ventilation resulting in hypoxia and death. Multiple blunt force trauma to torso and extremities consistent with being trampled by crowd. Dimitai Damour died so people could save money on televisions. This is not hyperbole or exaggeration. This is documented fact. The crowd that killed him was pursuing Black Friday deals, discounted electronics, bargains. The pursuit of these bargains created crowd density that crushed him to death. Several others are injured in the crush. Exact number varies by source, but police reports document at least 11 people treated at scene for injuries. 4 transported to hospital. 1 is pregnant woman who miscarries. The force of crowd compressing her abdomen causes placental abruption. Emergency cesarean section performed at hospital, but fetus cannot be saved. The woman survives but loses her child to crowd force that compressed flesh beyond what pregnancy could survive. The crowd, once inside, continues shopping. This is perhaps most disturbing detail. Documented in witness statements and security footage. People step over blood where Damour was trampled, navigate around broken glass, continue toward electronics department. Some may not know what happened, may assume broken glass is simply part of door opening process. But others know. Employees tell them. Police arrive and attempt to clear store. Some shoppers refuse to leave. Witness statements preserved in police reports document this. One shopper states to police, "I've been waiting since midnight. I'm not leaving until I get my TV." Another, "Someone dying is unfortunate, but I need to finish shopping." These statements are recorded, documented, evidence that some portion of crowd valued bargains over human life, valued consumption over compassion. Police eventually evacuate store by force, clear aisles, push shoppers toward exits. The store becomes crime scene, yellow tape, evidence markers, blood on floor where Damour died. The contrast is stark. Crime scene in retail space, death in temple of consumption, tragedy in place designed for celebration and plenty. By the time Jedimitai Damor is pronounced dead, Thanksgiving is over. Black Friday has begun, and across America, similar scenes unfold at lesser intensity but same pattern. Crowds crushing, people injured, violence erupting over merchandise, the ritual of consumption becoming mechanism of harm. The 2008 Walmart stampede is not isolated. It is culmination of patterns stretching back over a century. Thanksgiving crowd disasters occurring with grim regularity because holidays create conditions where large groups gather in confined spaces with inadequate crowd control and insufficient exits. The specific context changes. Department stores in 1920s, theaters in early 20th century, retail spaces in modern era. But the physics remain constant. Human bodies compressed beyond safe density become killing force. November 28th, 1929. Thanksgiving Day. RH. Macy's department store in New York City holds its third annual Thanksgiving Day parade. The parade is already popular, attracts large crowds to Manhattan. At parade's conclusion, Macy's opens doors for holiday shopping. Approximately 10,000 people have gathered outside Herald Square store. When doors open, crowd surges forward with tremendous force. Police attempting crowd control are overwhelmed. People near doors are crushed against glass. Several fall and are trampled. Inside store, crowd continues pushing, knocking over display cases, collapsing shelving units under crowd pressure that exceeds structural design limits. Merchandise is crushed underfoot. Employees flee for safety. Remarkably, no one dies in 1929 Macy's crush. Dozens are injured, some seriously, broken bones, lacerations, trampling injuries, but no deaths. New York Police Department report on incident, preserved in municipal archives, notes. Only luck prevented fatalities. The enthusiasm of the crowd combined with inadequate crowd control created dangerous conditions that could easily have resulted in deaths. The report recommends changes: police barriers, controlled entry, capacity limits. Some recommendations are implemented, others ignored. Economics favor maximum customer flow. Safety measures that slow entry reduce sales. The tension between profit and safety is resolved in favor of profit until deaths force reconsideration. Through 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s, Thanksgiving and day after see numerous crush incidents at department stores. Most result in injuries rather than deaths. But the pattern is documented. Insurance companies charge higher premiums for Thanksgiving weekend. Cities require special permits for large events. Fire marshals monitor occupancy. The danger is recognized and managed, but not eliminated. November 25th, 1926. Thanksgiving evening. Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. Special Thanksgiving variety show. Theater capacity is 1,200. Approximately 1,500 people are admitted. Overcrowding is standard practice. Theaters routinely sell beyond capacity because not all ticket holders attend. Overbooking maximizes profit, usually works fine, sometimes becomes disaster. During second act, someone in balcony smells smoke, yells fire. There is no fire. The smell comes from stage effect, using flash powder. Common theatrical technique, produces dramatic visual effect and distinct smell of burning. But no actual fire, no actual danger. Just theatrical smoke and smell. But the crowd panics. The word fire spreads faster than fire itself. Instant contagion. Everyone rushes for exits simultaneously. Main exit doors open inward. This is fatal design. Doors that open inward become barriers when crowds press against them. The pressure from behind prevents doors from opening, creates blockage, transforms exit into trap. Side exits are partially blocked by decorative panels installed to improve theatre aesthetic. These panels narrow exit width, create bottleneck. When hundreds attempt to exit simultaneously, bottleneck becomes killing zone. People jam, fall, are trampled, create obstacle that traps those behind. Balcony stairs become mass grave. Narrow stairway designed for leisurely descent, not for emergency evacuation of balcony section holding 300 people. The stairs jam immediately. People fall, others fall on top. The pile grows. Those at bottom are crushed under weight of those above. Those in middle suffocate. Those at top continue pushing downward, unaware that their pushing is killing. 11 people die, all from crushing or trampling, not from fire, because no fire exists. 43 are injured, some seriously. The deaths are entirely preventable, result from false alarm and inadequate exits and crowd panic that transforms rational people into terrified mass that kills its own members. Theatre manager is charged with manslaughter for overcrowding and inadequate exits. At trial, defense argues that such practices are common industry-wide, that every theatre overbooks, that exit design is standard, that panic was unforeseeable. Jury acquits, because if everyone is guilty, no one is guilty. Because common practice, no matter how dangerous, is difficult to prosecute when it is genuinely common. The pattern repeats across Thanksgiving history. Different venues, different cities, different decades, same fundamental physics. Crowd density exceeds safe thresholds. Exits are inadequate. Panic spreads. People die crushed by other people who are themselves victims. There are no villains in stampedes except perhaps those who created conditions by allowing excessive density or providing inadequate exits or failing to train staff in crowd management. November 28, 2008. Same Black Friday as Jedimitai Damour's death. Multiple other crush incidents occur nationwide. Target in Maryland. Shoppers break down doors, trample each other. Several injuries. No deaths, but only luck prevents them. Toys R Us in California. 2 men get into shooting incident over disputed toy. Kill each other in front of children. The toy is not worth 2 lives, but perception in moment overrides rationality. FBI crime statistics for Black Friday 2008, publicly available through FBI uniform crime reports, document 12 deaths nationwide from shopping-related incidents. 12 in one day, some from crowd crushes, some from violence, some from traffic accidents in parking lots. The deaths are distributed across country, not concentrated in single location. This makes them less visible, less likely to generate policy response, but no less dead. Between 2006 and 2019, Black Friday shopping results in documented 17 deaths. The count comes from Black Friday Death Count website, which compiles verified incidents from news reports and police records. 12 deaths from crowd crushes and tramplings, 3 from shootings, 2 from parking lot accidents, over 400 injuries requiring hospitalization, thousands of minor injuries treated at scene. The website is controversial. Retailers argue it sensationalizes, that it discourages shopping, that it exaggerates danger, but the data is verifiable. Each incident is documented. News articles, police reports, court records. The deaths occurred, the injuries occurred. The question is not whether data is accurate, but whether we acknowledge it. Why does Black Friday create such dangerous conditions? Factors are multiple and interact in complex ways. Retailers advertise limited quantities of heavily discounted items, creating artificial scarcity. Economic theory predicts that scarcity increases perceived value and generates competition. The strategy works from marketing perspective. From safety perspective, it creates stampedes. Stores open at midnight or earlier, when shoppers are tired, judgment impaired by sleep deprivation, Patience worn thin by waiting hours in cold. The timing maximizes vulnerability. Popular stores draw thousands to relatively small entrance areas, creating crowd densities that exceed safe thresholds before doors even open. Many stores staff minimally during overnight hours. Cost control measure reduces labor expenses, also reduces security, reduces crowd management capability. When crush occurs, insufficient staff are present to respond effectively. Consumer psychology during holiday season creates pressure to find perfect gifts. Sales create urgency. Doorbuster, deals available only in first hour, only in limited quantities. The time pressure and scarcity pressure combine to override rational decision-making. For many shoppers, Black Friday sales represent only way to afford gifts for family. This is documented in consumer surveys. Significant percentage of Black Friday shoppers report they cannot afford full-price gifts. Sales make gift-giving possible. The perceived need to get deals creates aggressive behavior individuals might not exhibit in other contexts. Economic desperation intersects with crowd dynamics. Result is sometimes violence, sometimes death. But beneath modern statistics and modern causes, fundamental pattern remains unchanged from 19th century theatre panics. Large crowds, inadequate space, competition for limited resources, inadequate exits, panic response. Human crowd behavior under pressure has not changed. Technology has not changed it. Wealth has not changed it. Education has not changed it. What has changed is context. Crowds gather for shopping rather than entertainment, but danger mechanisms are identical. Crowd safety experts have studied Thanksgiving-related crushes extensively. Research published in journals like Safety Science reveals predictable patterns. When crowd density exceeds 4 to 5 people per square meter, individuals lose ability to control movement. They are pushed by collective force regardless of personal intention. At 6 or more people per square meter, crushing becomes probable. Not merely possible, but statistically likely. Panic spreads through crowds like contagion. One person's screaming fire can trigger mass panic even when no danger exists. Research on crowd psychology demonstrates that panic is social contagion, spreads through observation and imitation. Once panic begins, rational thought ceases. Prefrontal cortex shuts down. Amygdala takes over. Fight or flight response activates. In dense crowds, flight is impossible. Fighting creates crushing at exits where everyone loses. Vast majority of crush deaths occur at exits, at bottlenecks where people jam doorways, creating human blockages. Those behind continue pushing. Unaware exit is blocked. Unaware people are dying ahead. The pressure builds exponentially. Crushing occurs. People die standing upright, held in place by crowd pressure, unable to fall, unable to breathe, dying on their feet while surrounded by other people who are themselves victims. Solutions are known, documented in crowd management guidelines, published by organizations like National Fire Protection Association and International Association of Venue Managers. Limit crowd sizes strictly. Enforce capacity limits absolutely. Design exits to open outward. Provide multiple exits spaced around perimeter. Station trained security at all potential bottleneck points. Educate public about crush dangers. Monitor crowd density continuously. Intervene before critical density is reached, but enforcement is inconsistent because economic pressure to maximize attendance conflicts with safety requirements, and individual shoppers, desperate for deals or entertainment, make dangerous choices. Entering crowds that exceed safe density, participating in stampedes, choosing savings over safety until choice becomes catastrophe. Jadimi Tai Damore's death prompts changes at Walmart and other major retailers. Many stop overnight Black Friday openings. Many implement online sales to reduce in-store crowding. Many redesign entrances with better crowd barriers. Install more security. Train staff in crowd management. These changes save lives in subsequent years. Deaths and injuries decline. Pattern improves. But smaller retailers often lack resources for such changes, and shoppers still gather in dangerous densities for Thanksgiving-related events. Because cultural emphasis on consumption and economic reality that many families cannot afford full-price gifts create pressures that override safety concerns. Jedimitai Damor has a memorial fund in his name. His family establishes it to honor memory and advocate for retail worker safety. The fund supports training programs, funds research on crowd management, advocates for stronger regulations. This is how memory becomes action, how death becomes prevention, how tragedy becomes lesson if we choose to learn. But many victims from smaller incidents have no public commemoration. Their deaths are recorded in police reports, noted in death certificates, mentioned briefly in local news, then forgotten except by families who remember, who cannot shop on Black Friday without remembering, who cannot participate in Thanksgiving ritual of consumption without seeing connection to death. Jedimitai Damor's mother, Ojera Charles, gives interviews for years after her son's death. Her statements are preserved in news archives. She says in 2009, "My son died so people could save $20 on a television. His life was worth more than $20. But to those people, saving money was more important than his life. I cannot forgive this. I will not forgive this." In 2013, 5 years, and I still cannot shop on Black Friday, cannot even drive past stores. I see my son on the floor, trampled, dying, while people step over him to get bargains. This is America. This is what we value. Cheap televisions over human life. Her grief is raw, permanent, understandable. Her son was killed by crowd pursuing bargains. The juxtaposition is obscene. Life versus discount. The equation should be obvious, but in the moment, in the crowd, with adrenaline and competition and sleep deprivation affecting judgment, people make choices they might not make under other conditions. And Jedimitai Damor dies, and his mother grieves, and Thanksgiving is ruined forever for his family. We ascend now from Walmart entrance, from shattered glass and blood on linoleum and a body trampled by 2,000 shoppers. We descend one final time into darkness that is not ancient history, but ongoing pattern. Not past tragedies, but present dangers. Not lessons learned, but lessons ignored. We enter highways at Thanksgiving, where hundreds die annually, where automobiles become coffins, where holiday travel demand creates conditions where normal risks intensify beyond what judgment can manage, where the pressure to arrive on time overrides the caution necessary to arrive alive, where American conviction that destination matters more than journey kills with statistical regularity. And we enter homes at Thanksgiving, where domestic violence erupts behind closed doors, where family gatherings that should bring joy instead bring harm, where knives used to carve turkey also carve flesh, where the holiday of gratitude becomes occasion for murder, where pattern continues year after year because we refuse to acknowledge that holidays are dangerous, and that celebration requires vigilance, and that the dead deserve remembering even as we celebrate with the living. Chapter 5. Modern Carnage, Highways and Homes, November 22nd, 2023. Thanksgiving Eve, Interstate 95 in Virginia, 10 o'clock in the evening. The highway carries the accumulated burden of Thanksgiving travel. Millions of vehicles, millions of people, all moving toward destinations where families wait and tables are set and traditions are maintained. The volume is staggering. documented in traffic monitoring systems that track vehicle counts at strategic points along interstate corridors. Interstate 95 on Thanksgiving Eve carries approximately 20% more traffic than typical Wednesday evenings. The increase is predictable, planned for by traffic engineers, accommodated by infrastructure designed to handle peak loads. But infrastructure is designed for normal weather, for visibility, for conditions where human reaction time is sufficient to prevent collision. Tonight, conditions will not be normal. At 10:03, dense fog settles over a section of Interstate 95 near Fredericksburg. The fog is not unusual for Virginia in November. Meteorological conditions favor fog formation, cold ground, warm, moist air from the Atlantic, calm winds. Fog develops in low-lying areas, particularly near waterways. This section of Interstate 95 runs near Potomac River. Fog is predictable here, expected by experienced drivers, but prediction does not equal preparation. The fog is dense. Visibility drops to near zero within minutes, not gradually, not in a way that allows drivers to slow progressively and safely, but suddenly. One moment visibility is 200 feet, next moment 50 feet, then 20, then 0. Drivers traveling at 70 miles per hour find themselves blind. The instinct is to brake. The instinct is correct, but insufficient. At 70 miles per hour, vehicles travel approximately 100 feet per second. Reaction time from perception to brake application averages 1.5 seconds. This means vehicles travel 150 feet before braking even begins. And once braking begins, stopping distance on dry pavement from 70 miles per hour is approximately 315 feet. Total distance from perception of hazard to complete stop, approximately 465 feet. In fog with 20 feet visibility, this is impossible. Drivers cannot see far enough ahead to stop in time, cannot avoid obstacles that appear suddenly in their headlight beams, cannot do anything except hope their path is clear. Hope is not strategy, hope is prayer. And prayer does not prevent collision when physics dictates otherwise. At 10:06, 3 minutes after fog descends, the first collision occurs. Two vehicles, both traveling at highway speed. Neither driver sees the other until too late. Impact at combined speed of approximately 140 miles per hour. The vehicles are destroyed. Drivers killed instantly. Bodies subjected to forces beyond what flesh can withstand. The vehicles come to rest blocking 2 lanes of 3-lane highway. At 10:07, 60 seconds after first collision, more vehicles approach, traveling at 70 miles per hour. Visibility near zero. They see the wreckage perhaps 2 seconds before impact. Brake desperately, insufficient. They strike the wreckage at 50 miles per hour. The impact adds to the debris field. More lanes blocked, more vehicles destroyed, more people injured or killed. At 10:08, the debris field spans all 3 lanes. Southbound Interstate 95 is completely blocked, but traffic continues approaching from behind. Hundreds of vehicles, all traveling at highway speed, all unable to see more than 20 feet ahead. They enter the fog and encounter the wreckage with no warning and insufficient time to stop. The pileup grows exponentially. Each collision adds to the obstruction. More vehicles strike the growing mass of wreckage. Some drivers see the collision in time to swerve, but swerving in dense traffic at high speed often causes secondary collisions. Vehicles that avoid the main pileup strike other vehicles or barriers or roll over. The disaster spreads along the highway. What begins as 2-vehicle collision becomes 47-vehicle catastrophe within 15 minutes, the final count. 47 vehicles involved, 7 people dead, 23 injured, some critically. The numbers are verified through Virginia State Police reports and National Transportation Safety Board investigation documents. Each number represents human consequence. Each death is person who departed home expecting to reach family for Thanksgiving. who trusted that their vehicle and their skill and the infrastructure would deliver them safely, who died on highway because fog and speed and human limitations conspired against survival. Emergency responders arrived to find quarter-mile stretch of Interstate 95 covered in wreckage, vehicles crushed beyond recognition, bodies trapped in twisted metal, injured people wandering in fog, disoriented, in shock, blood on pavement, fuel leaking from ruptured tanks, fire hazard requiring immediate mitigation. The scene is chaos, organized chaos as first responders establish perimeter and begin triage and extraction, but chaos nonetheless. The interstate is closed for 16 hours, from 10 in the evening Wednesday until 2 in the afternoon Thursday. Thanksgiving Day. Traffic is diverted onto secondary roads not designed for interstate volume. Backups extend for miles. Thousands of travelers are stranded. Some spend Thanksgiving in their cars, on highway shoulders, at rest stops, in hotels that quickly fill beyond capacity. They miss Thanksgiving with families, miss dinners, miss traditions, miss celebrations they traveled to attend. But they are alive. Unlike 7 who died in the fog. Unlike families who receive calls instead of visits. Who learn of deaths when police arrive at doors. Who spend Thanksgiving making funeral arrangements instead of sharing meals. For whom holiday becomes not celebration, but trauma. Not gratitude, but grief. The National Transportation Safety Board investigates. Report is publicly available through NTSB database. Conclusions are predictable. Fog, excessive speed, following too closely. Recommendations are standard. Reduce speed and reduced visibility. Increase following distance. Consider variable speed limits in fog-prone areas. The recommendations are reasonable, evidence-based, and largely ignored, because following them requires acknowledging that arriving on time matters less than arriving alive. Requires accepting that some destinations should not be reached if conditions make reaching them dangerous. Requires admitting that holidays are not so important that death is acceptable price for attendance. But deeper cause is evident in everything the investigation documents, but does not explicitly state Thanksgiving travel pressure. Drivers were rushing to reach destinations before Thanksgiving Day. They drove despite dangerous conditions. They drove faster than safe, because arriving on time seemed more important than arriving alive. They drove with reduced vigilance because they were tired, stressed, focused on arrival rather than journey. This is pattern, documented in traffic statistics, analyzed in transportation research, published in journals and reports that document Thanksgiving as one of deadliest travel periods. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration tracks this. Their data, publicly available through NHTSA website, reveals grim consistency. Approximately 400 to 450 traffic deaths occur during Thanksgiving period, from Wednesday before through Sunday after. Approximately 50 to 60 deaths occur specifically on Thanksgiving Day. Approximately 100 to 120 deaths occur on Thanksgiving Eve, making it single deadliest travel day of year. Why is Thanksgiving travel so deadly? Factors are multiple and interact. Timing pressure is intense. Thanksgiving is single-day holiday. Dinner occurs at specific time on specific day. This creates pressure to arrive by Thursday afternoon. Pressure that makes people drive through night. Take risks. Ignore weather warnings. Continue traveling in conditions where stopping would be safer, but would mean missing the meal. Missing the gathering. Disappointing family. The social pressure overrides survival instinct. Distance compounds danger. Americans travel farther for Thanksgiving than most holidays. Average Thanksgiving trip distance is 214 miles according to American Automobile Association statistics, more than double average holiday trip distance, Longer distances mean more time on highways, more exposure to danger, more fatigue accumulating, more opportunities for mechanical failure or driver error or weather to create catastrophe. Inexperienced drivers add to risk. Thanksgiving travel includes people who rarely drive long distances, college students driving home, urban residents who normally use public transit, elderly people who limit driving but make exception for holiday. These drivers are less experienced with highway driving, less aware of risks, more likely to make errors in judgment or reaction, more likely to follow too closely or drive too fast or fail to adjust for conditions. Vehicle overloading creates mechanical dangers. Families pack cars with luggage, food, gifts, passengers. Weight distribution becomes suboptimal. Handling deteriorates. Braking distances increase. Tire stress increases. Mechanical failures that might not occur in normally loaded vehicles occur when vehicles are stuffed beyond design limits. Distractions multiply. Drivers traveling with family face constant distractions, children asking questions, passengers giving directions or criticizing driving, food being eaten, devices being used. Studies show family travel involves 30 to 40% more driver distraction than solo driving. Distraction reduces reaction time, increases collision risk, turns routine driving into dangerous activity. Pre-holiday drinking creates additional danger. Thanksgiving Eve has become known as Blackout Wednesday, one of year's biggest bar nights. Young adults home from college gather at bars. People who finished work for holidays celebrate. DUI arrests on Thanksgiving Eve rank in top 5 nights annually, according to FBI uniform crime reports. And drunk drivers kill, not just themselves but innocent others. Families traveling safely who are struck by vehicles driven by people whose judgment is impaired and who should not be driving, but who choose to drive anyway. The documented Thanksgiving traffic disasters beyond 2023 Virginia crash are numerous. Each year brings variations on same pattern: fog, ice, snow, rain, driver error, mechanical failure, drunk driving, different immediate causes, same fundamental pattern. Holiday travel demand creating conditions where risks intensify. November 29, 1991, Interstate 5 in California. Dense fog causes chain reaction crash involving approximately 200 vehicles over several miles. 17 people die, over 100 injured. Fog is so dense rescue efforts are hampered. Ambulances cannot reach crash sites quickly. Some injured wait hours for treatment. Die waiting. The crash remains one of deadliest fog-related crashes in United States history. November 24, 2005, Thanksgiving Day, Ohio Turnpike. Snow squalls create whiteout conditions. 60 vehicle pileup results in 4 deaths and 37 injuries. Ohio State Highway Patrol. Report notes drivers were traveling at normal highway speeds despite near zero visibility. They did not adjust speed for conditions. They maintained 70 miles per hour in whiteout. The result was predictable. People died. November 21st, 2012, Thanksgiving Eve, Texas. Drunk driver crosses center line, strikes vehicle carrying family of 6 head-on. Mother, father, 4 children, ages 2 to 10. All 6 die. Impact speed estimated at 120 miles per hour combined. No chance of survival. Drunk driver survives with minor injuries. Blood alcohol content, 3 times legal limit. Convicted of 6 counts of manslaughter. Sentenced to 50 years. Serves time knowing he killed entire family. Whether that knowledge produces remorse or merely acknowledgement, we cannot know. But 6 are dead. Family erased. Thanksgiving dinner where 6 chairs sit empty forever. November 22nd, 2017. Thanksgiving Eve, Colorado. Tour bus carrying 48 passengers crashes on Interstate 70 during snowstorm. Bus slides on ice, leaves highway, rolls down embankment, 2 passengers die. 16 critically injured. Investigation reveals driver was speeding for conditions, attempting to maintain schedule despite dangerous weather. Economic pressure overriding safety judgment. Pattern repeating. November 27th, 2019. Thanksgiving Eve, Florida. Semi-truck driver falls asleep at wheel, crosses center line, strikes multiple vehicles. 8 people die, including 6 members of one family. Grandmother, parents, 3 children. Family erased like Texas family. Truck driver had violated hours of service regulations. Driven too many hours without rest. Attempting to complete delivery before Thanksgiving. Economic pressure. Schedule priority. Result: 8 dead. These are large-scale crashes that make national news. But beneath headlines are thousands of smaller Thanksgiving traffic accidents. 1 or 2 vehicles, 1 or 2 deaths per incident. Make local news briefly, then forgotten. But they accumulate. Cumulative toll is staggering. Since 1950, when NHTSA began systematic tracking, approximately 30,000 to 35,000 people have died in Thanksgiving-related traffic accidents. That is more than died in 9/11 attacks. That is equivalent to major commercial airline crash every single Thanksgiving for 75 years. But because deaths are distributed across country and individual accidents, they do not generate same cultural attention or policy response. We do not build monuments to highway deaths. Do not hold national moments of silence. Do not fundamentally change behavior in response. We simply accept that holidays are dangerous and continue celebrating as though danger does not exist. Safety recommendations are well known and simple. Leave earlier to avoid time pressure. Drive rested. Stop every 2 hours. Check weather and delay travel if conditions are dangerous. Never drink and drive. Wear seatbelts and secure children in proper car seats. Do not use phones while driving. Adjust speed for conditions. Increase following distance. These precautions are inexpensive, easy, effective. Yet every Thanksgiving, people ignore them. They drink and drive. They speed. They drive exhausted. They text while driving. They take risks. And people die. Every year, hundreds of people. Dying because they or others made choices that prioritized convenience over safety. Arrival over survival. Tradition over caution. Beyond traffic accidents, other modern Thanksgiving dangers accumulate deaths. Cooking fires claim 5 to 10 lives annually, most from deep fryer accidents. Turkey fryers are particularly dangerous. Operate at temperatures over 350 degrees. Use multiple gallons of oil. One mistake, overfilling, using frozen turkey, operating indoors, causes catastrophic fire. Houses burn, people die. Pattern repeats annually despite warnings and despite alternatives. Domestic violence results in multiple homicides on Thanksgiving Day. Exact numbers vary by year, but FBI uniform crime reports show pattern. Domestic violence arrests spike 30 to 40% on Thanksgiving compared to average days. Most arrests are assault, some are murder. Incidents where forced family proximity and alcohol combine with existing abuse to create lethal outcomes. The family gathering that should bring joy instead brings violence. The meal that should represent abundance becomes occasion for harm. The holiday that celebrates gratitude becomes stage for murder. These deaths are documented. Each has case file. Each is investigated. Each results in conviction if perpetrator survives or is identified. But each also represents failure. Failure of family. Failure of society to prevent violence. Failure of holiday to live up to its promise. Choking deaths occur with some regularity at Thanksgiving. Large pieces of food consumed rapidly in social settings where alcohol has been consumed and where attention is divided. Someone chokes, cannot breathe, needs immediate intervention. Heimlich maneuver must be performed correctly and quickly. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes help is not present or arrives too late. 5 to 10 choking deaths annually at Thanksgiving meals. Preventable but not prevented. Suicide rates elevate during Thanksgiving week. This is documented in public health data. 20 to 30 deaths above baseline attributable to holiday stress, loneliness, family conflicts that make holiday unbearable rather than joyful. For people already struggling with depression or despair, Thanksgiving can be final trigger. The gap between holiday expectations and personal reality becomes too large. The forced gratitude feels mocking. The gathering they cannot attend, or that went poorly, becomes evidence of failure, and they end their lives. The cumulative modern Thanksgiving death toll averages 450 to 500 Americans during Thanksgiving week in holiday-related incidents. This does not include deaths during Thanksgiving week unrelated to holiday. This is specifically deaths caused by Thanksgiving travel, celebration, or stress. Over 75 years of modern record-keeping, that is approximately 35,000 to 40,000 Thanksgiving-related deaths. Holiday of Gratitude has claimed tens of thousands of lives. Should we stop celebrating Thanksgiving? Of course not. Vast majority of celebrations are safe and joyful. Millions of families gather without incident. Holiday serves important cultural functions, bringing families together, encouraging gratitude, marking seasonal transitions, providing opportunity for connection in era where connection is increasingly difficult. But we should celebrate honestly. We should acknowledge that holidays carry risks. We should take precautions. We should make informed choices about travel, alcohol, cooking safety. We should prioritize lives over convenience, over tradition, over expectation, and we should remember those who died, whose chairs remain empty at Thanksgiving tables, whose families gather with grief mixed into gratitude. Deaths are not inevitable, they are preventable. Prevention requires acknowledging danger exists. That celebration and tragedy can coexist. That gratitude for what we have should include vigilance to prevent losing it. This is not pessimism. This is realism. This is honoring dead by learning from their deaths, by refusing to repeat patterns that killed them, by choosing safety over convenience when those choices conflict. Stand at any highway rest stop on Thanksgiving Eve. Watch traffic stream past. Thousands of vehicles, millions of people, all rushing to reach destinations, to gather with family, to celebrate holiday. Most will arrive safely. Statistics favor survival, but approximately 120 will not. They will die in crashes on highways across America. Their final moments will be in vehicles, traveling to celebrations they will never reach, dying because someone chose to speed or drink or drive exhausted, or simply because fog descended and visibility vanished and physics dictated collision. Their families will receive calls instead of visits, will identify bodies instead of sharing meals, will spend Thanksgiving in hospitals or morgues or police stations instead of around dinner tables. And next year, pattern will repeat. Because we refuse to learn. Because we prioritize arriving on time over arriving alive. Because we believe disaster happens to other people, not to us, never to us, until it does. And then it is too late. Every Thanksgiving, we make choices. We choose whether to drink and drive, whether to drive exhausted, whether to speed because we are running late, whether to ignore weather warnings because we promised we would arrive, whether to take precautions or take risks. And every Thanksgiving, approximately 450 Americans make wrong choices or are victims of others' wrong choices and die. Their deaths purchase nothing, teach nothing if we refuse to learn, become merely statistics if we refuse to remember them as individuals. But they were individuals, had names, ages, families, They were someone's parent or child or spouse or friend. They were traveling to celebrate Thanksgiving, to gather with people they loved, to give thanks for what they had, and they died before reaching destination. Their Thanksgivings ended on highways or in homes or in circumstances that transform celebration into catastrophe. We ascend now from highways where hundreds die annually, from homes where violence erupts and cooking fires burn and celebration becomes occasion for harm. We ascend one final time, not to conclusion, but to recognition. Recognition that Thanksgiving's pattern of disaster is not history, but present. Not past, but ongoing. Not lessons learned, but lessons waiting to be learned if we choose to learn them. We return now from darkness. From Lake Erie, where 256 drowned in 1850 because commercial pressure overrode safety, and captain departed in dangerous weather, and paddle wheel broke, and boilers exploded. From Calumet River, where 46 drowned in 1919 because bridge mechanisms were worn for years, and Pennsylvania Railroad deferred repair and iron pins slipped, and train cars plunged into cold water. From Coconut Grove, where 492 suffocated in 1942 because exits were locked and capacity limits ignored and fabric ceilings burned and smoke killed in seconds. From Walmart entrance, where Jedimitai Damour was trampled in 2008 because 2,000 people crushed against doors, pursuing bargains, and glass shattered, and crowds surged, and man died under weight of bodies. From highways where 7 died in Virginia fog in 2023 because visibility vanished, and speed was too high, and vehicles collided, and interstate became mass grave. From homes where domestic violence erupts, and cooking fires burn, and every year pattern repeats with brutal consistency. We return knowing what we did not know before, that Thanksgiving's history contains darkness alongside light. That celebration and catastrophe have shared this holiday for generations, that thousands have died in preventable disasters. That pattern continues, not because we cannot learn, but because we choose not to. Because acknowledging that holidays are dangerous requires admitting that our traditions carry risks. That gratitude and grief are companions. That celebration requires vigilance. What have we learned? That Thanksgiving disasters follow patterns, that they are not random but predictable, that certain conditions reliably create danger. Maritime disasters occurred because late November combined maximum travel demand with maximum weather danger. Commercial pressure overrode safety. Captains departed in storms. Ships sank. People drowned. Pattern repeated until regulations changed. Until boiler inspections became mandatory and lifeboat requirements were enforced and deaths declined. Train disasters clustered around holiday because schedules were prioritized over maintenance, because engineers sped to deliver passengers on time, because railroads deferred repairs during most profitable week, because bridges that should have been replaced were kept in service beyond safe lifespan, because 46 people died when worn mechanisms finally failed. Pattern repeated until investigations forced changes, until maintenance became mandatory and speed limits were enforced and deaths declined. Coconut Grove fire killed hundreds because exits were locked and capacity limits ignored and profit prioritized over human life. Because owner chose aesthetics over safety and bribed inspectors and installed flammable materials and removed emergency lighting. Because 492 people died in 5 minutes when busboys struck match in basement decorated like tropical paradise. Pattern changed only after disaster. Only after deaths forced regulations that should have existed already. Stampedes occur because retailers create artificial scarcity and fail to control crowds and allow dangerous densities to develop. Because shoppers prioritize bargains over safety. Because economic pressure overrides judgment. Because Jedimitai Damour died under 2,000 bodies pursuing deals. Pattern continues but has improved where retailers implemented changes, where online shopping reduces in-store crowds, where entrances are redesigned. Deaths decline when lessons are learned, continue when lessons are ignored. Modern traffic deaths spike because Thanksgiving creates time pressure and long distances and fatigue and distraction, because drivers choose to travel despite dangerous conditions, because arrival seems more important than survival, because 7 die in Virginia fog, and 8 die when truck driver falls asleep, and family of 6 dies when drunk driver crosses center line. Pattern repeats every year. 450 deaths during Thanksgiving week. Pattern will continue until we choose differently. The common thread is that Thanksgiving amplifies existing risks. Travel that is usually safe becomes dangerous when millions travel simultaneously. Cooking that is routine becomes hazardous when done hastily with distractions. Family gatherings that are usually pleasant become dangerous when toxic relationships are forced together. Shopping that is mundane becomes violent when artificially scarce goods create competition. Thanksgiving does not create these dangers from nothing. It intensifies them through volume, through pressure, through expectation, through stress. We have learned that most Thanksgiving disasters are preventable. Griffith would not have sunk if Captain had waited for weather to improve. Pacific Express would not have crashed if bridge had been maintained. Coconut Grove victims would not have died if exits had not been locked. Stampedes would not occur if crowds were controlled. Traffic deaths would plummet if people drove sober and rested and adjusted speed for conditions. The deaths are preventable, but prevention requires choosing safety over convenience, over profit, over schedule, over tradition. Prevention requires acknowledging that celebration carries risk, that holidays are not magically safe, that good intentions do not prevent accidents, that arriving on time matters less than arriving alive, that some gatherings should not happen if conditions make them dangerous. That tradition is not worth dying for. These acknowledgements are difficult. They require humility. They require admitting that we are not invulnerable, that disasters happen not just to other people, but to us if we make wrong choices, or if others make wrong choices that affect us. We have learned that disasters cast long shadows that extend far beyond immediate deaths. Coconut Grove survivors who committed suicide in subsequent years because trauma was unbearable. Mary Patterson, who survived Griffith but lost family and could not celebrate Thanksgiving for 50 years afterward. Charles Willey, who lost wife Claudia at Coconut Grove and spent 50 Thanksgivings visiting her grave instead of celebrating. Yudimitai Damour's mother, who cannot shop on Black Friday without seeing her son dying trampled. The families of traffic victims who gather every Thanksgiving with empty chairs and grief. Tragedy transforms holidays permanently for those who experience it. Thanksgiving becomes associated with loss rather than gratitude, with death rather than celebration, with grief rather than joy. This is perhaps darkest lesson. Disaster does not end when fire is extinguished, or wreckage is cleared, or bodies are buried. It continues in trauma, in changed lives, in holidays forever tainted by association with catastrophe. We have learned that America has complicated relationship with acknowledging holiday darkness. We want Thanksgiving to be sacred, safe, untouchable by tragedy. We construct sanitized narratives, pilgrims and abundance, Norman Rockwell paintings, family gathered around table in warmth and plenty. These images are powerful, comforting, but incomplete. They exclude disasters that are equally part of Thanksgiving history, equally documented, equally real. Admitting that disasters cluster around holidays requires cognitive shift, requires acknowledging that celebration and catastrophe coexist, that gratitude and grief share space at Thanksgiving table, that tradition carries risk. This shift is uncomfortable. We resist it. We prefer simple narratives: good versus evil, safety versus danger, celebration versus tragedy. But reality is complex. Reality contains both, and acknowledging both does not diminish celebration. It enriches it, makes gratitude more meaningful because we recognize it could be lost, makes celebration more precious because we know it is not guaranteed. But we have also learned that acknowledging darkness does not require abandoning light. We can celebrate Thanksgiving while taking precautions. We can honor holidays' positive functions while acknowledging its dangers. Gratitude and grief can coexist. Celebration and vigilance can coexist. We can remember dead while celebrating with living. We can give thanks while also giving thought to safety. Can enjoy traditions while also adapting them to reduce risk. The dead deserve remembering. 256 who drowned on Griffith, 46 who plunged into Calumet River, 492 who suffocated at Coconut Grove, 11 who were crushed at Pantages Theatre, 7 Gianninis poisoned at their own table, Jidimitai Damour trampled at Walmart, 7 who died in Virginia fog, tens of thousands who have died in traffic accidents over 75 years of modern record keeping. These were not statistics. They were people with names, ages, families, hopes, futures. They were traveling to see loved ones, preparing meals to feed others, celebrating holidays they thought would be joyful, working to support families, shopping for gifts, simply living. Their deaths were not inevitable, were not acts of God beyond human control, were results of choices, sometimes their own, often others. Choices that prioritized convenience over safety, profit over precaution, schedule over survival, tradition over adaptation. We honor them by learning, by not repeating their mistakes, by acknowledging that every safety regulation was written in blood, that fire codes requiring multiple exits exist because people died trapped behind locked doors, that boiler inspection requirements exist because boilers exploded and ships sank, that bridge maintenance standards exist because bridges collapsed and trains crashed, that crowd control guidelines exist because stampedes killed, that traffic laws exist because collisions occurred. The dead cannot warn us. They speak only through documents preserved in archives, through death certificates and investigation reports and newspaper accounts and the bureaucratic records of tragedy. They speak through monuments where monuments exist, through empty chairs at tables, through families who remember. But they cannot speak directly, cannot grab us and force us to pay attention, cannot make us learn. That choice is ours. I am Mr. Ravenhurst, and I conclude by acknowledging that Thanksgiving's history is complex, containing both joy and tragedy, both gratitude and grief. Holiday has created happiness for millions, brought families together, marked seasons and transitions, and provided rhythm to American life. These are real benefits, real value, worth preserving and celebrating. But holiday has also created catastrophe for thousands, has killed through mechanisms both ancient and modern, through drowning and crushing and burning and poisoning and collision, has transformed celebration into disaster with brutal regularity across generations. This too is real. This too is part of Thanksgiving's history. And pretending it does not exist does not make it disappear, only makes us vulnerable to repeating it. The deaths are certain, documented, preserved in records accessible to anyone willing to look. The grief is real, carried by families across generations. The lessons are available, written in blood, codified in regulations, taught in safety courses, published in research, preserved in investigations. We have every tool necessary to prevent future disasters. Knowledge, technology, resources, regulations. The only thing we lack is will, the choice to prioritize safety over convenience, to acknowledge that holidays are dangerous, to act on that acknowledgement. Whether we make that choice determines whether next Thanksgiving adds new names to the list of those who died, or whether we finally learn lessons that thousands have already purchased with their lives. The choice is ours, made individually every time we get in car, every time we cook, every time we enter crowd, every time we make decisions about how we celebrate and with whom and under what conditions. The dead have made their contribution, have died so that we might learn, have provided evidence through their deaths of what not to do, of what happens when safety is compromised, of what price is paid when convenience overrides caution, what we do with that evidence, whether we learn or ignore, whether we honor their deaths by preventing others or dismiss their deaths as misfortune that happens to other people. That choice defines us. Every Thanksgiving, we stand at junction between past and future. Behind us stretches history of disaster, 200 years of documented Thanksgiving deaths, thousands of individual tragedies, patterns clear and predictable. Ahead lies choice. Continue patterns. Add new deaths to old totals. Or learn, change, prioritize safety. Make celebration less dangerous, not by making it less joyful, but by making it more mindful. The dead beneath Lake Erie and Calumet River and Coconut Grove and highways across America number in tens of thousands. They wait in darkness, preserved in cold water and cold earth and memory. They cannot speak, but their deaths speak for them. Speak of choices made and consequences suffered. Speak of preventable tragedies that were not prevented. Speak of lessons available to anyone willing to learn. This Thanksgiving, as you gather with family and friends and share meals and give thanks for what you have, remember briefly those who cannot gather, who died traveling to gatherings, or during celebrations, or in circumstances where holiday became catastrophe. Remember that your celebration is possible because you made choices that kept you alive, or because you were lucky, or because others made choices that protected you, or simply because disaster has not yet touched you, though statistics say it touches hundreds every year. Remember and be grateful, not just for abstract blessings, but for concrete safety, for arriving alive, for exits that open, for food that does not poison, for crowds that do not crush, for highways that do not become mass graves. And having remembered and been grateful, resolve to maintain that safety, to take precautions, to prioritize survival, to acknowledge that tradition is precious, but life is more precious. The dead ask nothing except that their deaths mean something, that lessons be learned, that future deaths be prevented, that their suffering purchase safety for others. Whether we grant this request, whether we honor their deaths by learning from them, whether we break patterns that have continued for generations, that is question we answer not in words, but in actions, in choices made every Thanksgiving, in priorities revealed through behavior, not rhetoric. Be safe, be grateful, be aware, honor dead by protecting living, and understand that most haunting thing about Thanksgiving disasters is not that they happened, but that most were preventable, that many could still be prevented, that every year, despite warnings, despite history, despite knowledge, people still die during what should be America's most joyful holiday. The pattern continues until we choose to end it, until we acknowledge that celebration requires vigilance, that gratitude requires awareness, that holidays carry dangers that must be recognized and mitigated, until we accept that arriving matters less than arriving safely, that tradition matters less than life, that convenience matters less than survival. The choice is ours, every year, every Thanksgiving, every journey, every meal, every gathering. Choose wisely. The dead cannot choose anymore, but we can. And our choices determine whether we honor their memory by learning from their deaths. or dishonor their memory by repeating the patterns that killed them. The rain falls on America tonight as it has fallen for centuries. Somewhere beneath Interstate 95, wreckage rusts from crashes past. In cemeteries across the nation, monuments mark Thanksgiving deaths. In archives, documentation preserves evidence of disasters we prefer to forget. And this Thanksgiving, like every Thanksgiving, hundreds will die unless we choose differently. The dead wait in darkness, not asking forgiveness for they did nothing wrong. Not demanding vengeance for vengeance is meaningless, simply asking that their deaths be remembered, that lessons be learned, that we who are alive make choices that honor their deaths by preventing others. Whether we grant this request, whether their deaths mean something or become merely forgotten statistics, that choice defines not them, but us. I am Mr. Ravenhurst. And this is when Thanksgiving went wrong, again and again and again across generations. Unless we finally choose to make it right, the pattern is documented, the lessons are clear, the choice is ours. What we do with that choice determines not only our Thanksgiving, but our humanity, our capacity to learn from tragedy, our willingness to acknowledge that beneath every celebration lies potential for catastrophe, and that preventing catastrophe requires not pessimism, but realism, not fear, but awareness, not abandoning tradition, but adapting it to recognize that life is precious and that protecting it is ultimate expression of gratitude. Choose life, choose safety, choose learning. The dead have spoken through their deaths. What we hear in that speech, whether we learn or ignore, whether we honor or forget, that is question that each Thanksgiving asks, and that each of us must answer.